When I was 7 years old, my mother and I moved to a small town in Massachusetts. It was a rough time for me as my father had just up and left a few weeks before. My mother told me that he had taken a better job somewhere. She told me that he still loved and cared about me, but even at such a young age, I understood that he had left us. It was Halloween week, and I started at my new school on the 25th of October. As a stubborn 7-year-old, I insisted on walking there by myself. My mother frowned, thought it over, then agreed with one caveat. "Alright, as soon as we walk the path together every night before school starts, and you promise to stay on the trail." She had bought a small 2-bedroom cottage less than a mile from my school, so it wouldn't be far. It was a nice little place, but I guess with my father gone, nothing could really feel like home. The evening before I began school, the two of us walked into the forest behind our house. Although the sun was starting to set, the path was clearly lit. "What a perfect way to school. Can you believe this house was still available?" she said. I nodded but said nothing. "We used to have a family here, you know. I really like this place," my mom said, smiling. The next morning, I made my way into the kitchen and was greeted with a warm smile and pancakes. As I sat down to eat, my mother must have noticed that I looked nervous and sat down next to me. "Don't worry, you'll make friends here. I have a good feeling," she said. Looking back, I can't really understand how after her husband left her, she could still be so strong. I just hope that I have some of her strength. I made my way down the path just as we had practiced every night. When I arrived at school, a tall teacher with thick glasses greeted me at the door and helped me into the classroom. I sat down among 10 other students, and the teacher began to speak about what the year was going to be like and what we would learn. No one was mean to me or anything, but no one really spoke to me either. All the kids were so busy talking about their costumes for Halloween that they barely even noticed a new kid was there. There was this one little girl, though, that said hello. She sat 2 rows back from the other children, and I figured that maybe she was new to the school as well. She was very pretty with brown hair and glasses, and as I glanced back, she caught my gaze and gave me a big smile. I tried to smile back, but she was so pretty that it was hard to not be shy. Turning back around, I tried to listen to the teacher, but I was really just thinking about her. School ended for the day at 3 o'clock. I grabbed my bag and rushed outside towards the path to my house, very anxious to run home and tell my mom about the pretty girl that had smiled at me. Hurrying home down the path, I suddenly tripped over something and fell hard, scraping my knee. Sitting up to examine my injury, I looked back to see what had made me stumble. I saw the biggest crow I had ever seen. Strange too, what was wrong with its eyes? As I made my way closer to examine it, I heard someone behind me. "Hello, I know you from school," she said. Surprised, I looked up quickly to see the pretty girl from class. Wondering if she had seen me fall, I was embarrassed and got to my feet quickly. My knee hurt pretty badly, but I was more worried about how I looked to her. Yeah, I think I saw you today in class. My name is Jimmy," I said. Smiling back, she replied, "I'm Margaret." We walked together down the trail. "How's your leg?" she asked. "Oh, it's okay," I said, trying to act tough. "You live down here too, huh?" She told me that her family had lived in this town for some time and that she also had a path behind her home leading through the forest to the school. We were instantly friends. As we got to my house, she surprised me by asking, "Can I see what your house looks like? You made it sound so nice." I quickly smiled and knocked on my front door. My mom answered, very surprised to see Margaret next to me. Smiling, she said, "Wow, you don't waste time making friends, do you, Jim? Are you going to introduce the young lady or just gonna stand there?" My face turned red as I muttered out, Oh, this is Margaret, and she lives around here, and we met at school today. Trying not to show my excitement, I acted cool. She wanted to come over, I said. Hello, ma'am. I wanted to see your house. My family lives here too. Margaret smiled and said, Come on in, my dear. I just this instant finished a batch of cookies, my mom replied. As the three of us sat around the kitchen table talking, we got on the subject of Halloween. What are you going as, Margaret? My mom asked. I'm going to be a witch this year. I heard they are scary, Margaret said. Witches aren't scary, I quickly stated. Smiling again, Margaret corrected herself. Well, I was going to go as a witch, but my family is out of town this weekend and, well, I don't really have a place to stay yet. It's a business trip and they said I was too young to go with them. They asked my regular babysitter, but she got sick yesterday and now... My mom interrupted her. Well, if it's alright with your parents, you would be more than welcome to stay here over the weekend and go trick-or-treating with us. It was at that moment I realized that I literally had the best mom in the world. What do you think, Jim? My mom asked, holding back a smile. Yeah, that's a great idea, I said. My mom drove Margaret home to meet her parents and asked them permission for her to stay at our home over the weekend. When my mom got back, I asked her how it had went. It went great, my mom said. I think her mother and aunt take care of her. They live in a beautiful little cottage down the trail. They invited me in and we talked for quite a while. Both of them thought it was a great idea. I do have one question though. You have a crush on this girl, correct? Pretending I didn't hear her, I quickly ran over to my room and closed the door. Got homework, love you, I said, a little embarrassed. That night, I tried to sleep but was too excited for Halloween. It was just a few days off and I had already made a friend. This weekend was going to be great. Thinking about how this might really be a new start, I began to notice something in the corner of my room. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then slowly my eyes began to focus. There was a tall man with long dark hair and a gray beard. His eyes were piercing and focused. They stared unblinking out the window. My body started to tremble in fear. I hid under the blankets pretending it wasn't real and prayed he hadn't seen me. Peeking out from under, I almost screamed out of terror. He was just floating there, holding a huge axe with what looked like blood on it. I wanted to scream and run out of the room, but I was frozen. I couldn't make a sound. I don't know how I fell asleep, but when I woke up the next day, he was gone and it was like it never happened. I wanted to tell my mom, but I just couldn't for some reason. I don't know why. The week went by quickly except for every single night the man in my room would return, always holding a large axe in his hands. Some nights he would just peer out the window and other nights he would pace back and forth. I could see his mouth move but no words came out. I watched him in fear and awe, and the night before Halloween he finally turned his head and looked directly at me. He locked eyes with mine and he took a step forward. I pulled the blankets over my head and started to shake in fear. Was this real? Was I going crazy? Halloween day came and I almost told Margaret about the man in my house. I felt guilty for not telling her, but I was afraid she would think I was crazy or something. And looking forward to this weekend was the only thing I had been happy about in some time. Margaret and I went house to house that night. I tried to have a good time, but wondered what was going to happen tonight when she stayed at my house. Would the man come again? Would he see her? She asked me what was wrong and I pretended it was nothing. As we got back to my house, my mom had prepared a sleeping space for us in the living room. Margaret was going to sleep on the couch and I had a blanket spread out on the floor. We compared candy, both agreeing we were tired. My mom was sleeping in the next room and told us to wake her up if we needed anything at all. That night, as Margaret and I went to sleep, wind started to howl against the windows. I told myself that I had never seen a man outside of my room and I thought we would be safe here. I felt guilty, but It was just so nice having a friend with me at night. I couldn't face him again alone. The storm became louder and louder as the clock struck midnight. Staring at the ceiling, I was starting to become more tired when I heard Margaret ask, "Jimmy, are you awake?" "I'm up," I said. "I can't sleep. It's freezing. Do you have another blanket?" she asked. I told her I had one in my room, then froze. Realizing what I just said, I would have to go back into my room. Searching for any other option, I knocked on my mom's door for a blanket, but she didn't reply back. The storm was so loud that even knocking didn't wake her. I thought about yelling her name, but realized how childish that would make me look to Margaret. "Didn't you say you had a blanket in your room?" she asked again. I took a deep breath and replied, "Yes, I'll get it for you." Opening the door slowly, I saw no sign of any ghost or monster. I held my breath and quickly ran over to the far closet to find the extra blanket. Fumbling through my clothes, I paused as I heard a door close behind me. The wind now almost shook the house, and it took every ounce of my courage to turn around. There was no ghost though, it was just Margaret. "Oh, it's just you," I said. Margaret smiled and replied, "Who were you expecting, the boogeyman?" It was then I noticed that something was off about her. As she locked the door behind her, I realized she was taller than before. With the door closed, it was very dark in my room, but were her eyes always red? I thought I could see two small red dots looking back from where her eyes should be. She laughed and softly said, "You shouldn't have let me in, Jimmy." "Margaret, this isn't funny," I stammered. "I find it very funny," she said. As she made her way across the room, I saw a large knife in her hand. The moon shone across her face, and what was once a beautiful young girl was now an old, haggard-looking woman with a hideous smile on her face. "Want a hug, Jimmy?" she asked. I backed into the corner of my room and screamed out for my mother. "She can't hear you, Jimmy. She's never going to hear you," Margaret said. Having nowhere to go, I watched her get closer and closer. I was so scared now that I couldn't even move. All I could do was watch as she lifted the knife over her head and smiled wickedly. What happened next, I will remember for the rest of my life. Before she could bring the knife down, something caught her gaze. She looked over towards the window and sunk back in fear. She screamed out and fell onto the floor, trying desperately to run, but he stopped her. Holding onto her with one hand, the tall man brought down the axe on her neck. She screamed in agony and fear, her neck now half off as she still tried to crawl away. Placing his foot down roughly on her back, he pinned her to the floor. He then brought the axe down hard again with both hands, severing her neck almost entirely. There was a strong pull and then a grisly ripping sound. I heard a horrible pop as the man pulled her head completely off her body. All I could do was watch as he opened the window and carried her body and head out into the forest. Stunned, I looked out. I could barely see, yet I just stood there and watched as he disappeared completely. I tried waking my mother, but she couldn't seem to hear as I shouted her name. After I checked to see that she was safe, I went back into my room and just stood at the window. I think I was in some kind of shock. After a while, I heard her door open. Running over to her, I hugged her close. "Good morning. Did you two have fun last night?" she asked, seemingly having heard nothing. At a loss for words, I slowly just nodded my head. "Tell Margaret that breakfast will be ready in 2 shakes. Is she still asleep on the couch?" my mom asked. I replied, mumbling something about her mom already had picked her up. Then my mom went to the kitchen to start breakfast. I wonder what I would say if her parents did actually show up to collect her. In the unlikely even that her parents were human, they would probably be thankful that she was gone. That year was the start of the new chapter in my life. I now knew that demons, witches, ghosts, evil things weren't just fairy tales. They were real. I'm older now and I have a family of my own. My son was born a few months back and I'd never spoken a word of any of this to my wife. I never found the right moment to tell her. One last thing. A few days after Halloween as a child, my mom had taken out a photo album and sat down next to me. I watched as she casually thumbed through the photos, and then I stopped her. "Who is that man?" I asked. "Him? That's your great-grandfather," she replied. I stared at the photo. It was him. I slept better after that. I would still see him from time to time staring out my window into the darkness. Margaret wasn't the last evil thing I would come across, and I now worried about the safety of my newborn son. It's Halloween night as I stand over my son's crib and stare out into the shadows of the forest beyond. I can feel something coming for us, but I don't know one thing. We aren't alone. I never been straight with anybody, so I'm going to tell you something that's true. I hate my family. My older sister moved to America with hardly a goodbye. My dad's dead and I always hoped my mom would follow him. Well, one day she did. She left behind a crap load of money and a 6-bedroom house set outside the city, and with the stream running up beside it. My dad had left her a £2 million fortune, enough for her to live on with change, especially since she was too much of a skinflint to spend any of it. Now she's dead. The house and the money sat there. I didn't expect to see a penny. Me and Mom had always hated each other. We didn't have little spats, we had a full-on feud. And growing up, my cheeks would always be red from where she slapped me. Sometimes she did it backhand and cut my face with her engagement ring. Yeah, we hated each other. It never got better when I matured and she didn't mellow with old age. She just got more and more spiteful. By the time she died, we'd gone 5 years, 6 months and 3 days without speaking. To some extent, I sympathize with her. She's had a hard life. My dad spent 4 nights a week out of the marital bed and used to call her ugly and wouldn't let her have her self-esteem. It was a depressing marriage. Then there was my younger sister. She was 10 years my junior, and from the minute she was born, she was the favorite. Always getting the hugs Mom never gave me. I don't want to whine, but I resented it and I was cruel to her. Call it my mother's side getting through. That changed when my sister had her accident. She fell 20 feet out of a maple tree and thumped her head on the floor. They said when they found her, blood trickled out of her ears and she was already comatose. She's never woken up. I told you I didn't expect a penny from the will, so you can imagine my surprise when our family lawyer told me I was the sole heir. Yep, he was surprised too. £2 million and a 6-bedroom house were mine, but on one condition. I had to move in and become my sister's sole carer. Caring for a coma victim isn't hard, to be honest. You just have to listen out for irregular beeps on the machines they have her hooked up to. She had nurses who came once a day to check on everything, so I didn't have to do a thing and I was a millionaire for it. But I hated being in the same house as her. She's my sister and all, but after so long in a coma, you're already dead. That, coupled with how she looked, meant I couldn't see her as my sister. She was a woman, technically, but she never developed. so she was more like a freakishly tall child. Her bones stuck out, her skin was gray, and her face had the absent look of a corpse. At the beginning, it was unnerving sleeping in the room next door to her. I lied in my bed trying to sleep, but all I could think about was her on the other side of the wall, immobile and mute. One night, she scared the hell out of me. I was stretched on my bed, lights off. The house was as silent as ever. I heard a bang from my sister's room and something clattered to the floor. I thought she'd fallen out of bed, like maybe the nurse had left her in a funny position. I ran in her room, but she was laid down like always, face staring absently at the ceiling. On the other side of the room, a photo frame was on the floor. A few nights later, the nurse called in sick, so I checked on my sister myself. I made sure she was nowhere near the edge of the bed. I got paranoid and switched off the light. It was too early to go to bed, so I had a few drinks. The thing about my bladder is it only acts up when I'm in bed. And sure enough, as soon as I tried to go to sleep that night, I had an urge to go to the toilet. On the way there, I noticed my sister's door slightly ajar. I probably hadn't closed it right, but after the photo frame incident, I thought I better check. Everything seemed fine, but when I looked at my sister, I was sure she was wearing a different gown. I wouldn't bet my dead mom's house on it, and you write that kind of thing off, don't you? It must have been a trick of the brain. That explanation satisfied me, and I slept for a few hours. But the next day had me doubting myself again. The nurse was well enough to visit the next night, and she did the usual checks. Before she left, she grabbed me for a word. "I'm sorry about last night," she said. "It was a short notice, but you did a good job." "It was nothing," I said. "No, you were great. I didn't think you changed her clothes and everything." That got my attention. I didn't press it because the nurse would never believe me, but you can bet I didn't sleep easy from then on. Every reasonable explanation ran through my head. Did I change them and forget? Was the nurse mistaken? I didn't have a clue. Oh, I know, I never went in my sister's room unless I could avoid it. A few weeks later, I didn't have a choice. The machines she's hooked up to have alarms, and one night they started making a racket. I got my ass into her room quick as I could, and as soon as I did, the alarm stopped. It was a big relief. Then I looked at my sister's face. Her mouth was wide open, an enormous cavity aimed at the ceiling, the corners of her lips crooked. They said it was just a reflex, but as much as I wanted to buy it, I still moved my bedroom to the other side of the house, as far away as I could get. I hear noises every night, scaring the crap out of me every time. I lost sleep and I was a stressed out wreck. As pathetic as it sounds, I didn't dare go check on her. And then something happened that made me move out of the house. It was a rare night where I felt like I was going to get some sleep. I was in that in-between stage where you know you're on the edge of sleep, but not quite there yet. Then my bedroom door opened and banged shut. It shook me straight out of drowsiness, and I sat up in bed. I could feel something in the room with me. It wasn't right. On the floor beside me, lit in the moonlight, was my sister. Her body rigid and her mouth wide open, her face pointed at mine. I have always been a scrawny person since I was in elementary school. Granted, due to my semi-decent sense of humor, I was never bullied. But to the opposite sex, I was never deemed attractive or dateable. Friend zone was the nation I inhabited, and until the age of 25, I was completely fine with it. Of course, I craved the attention when it came time for the homecoming dance or prom. But I always managed to get a friend that went with me out of pity. After high school, I went to a local college and graduated 5 years later. I ran out of funds, so I worked in sales after my sophomore year to make enough money for my last 2 years. On my graduation day, I looked back on the years I spent in college and immediately felt regret. Every day after my classes, I would just go back home and eat dinner with my parents, and go to my bedroom where I would spend the whole night surfing the web and reading. I made a couple of friends and had a date that ended terribly. But I just felt like I never truly utilized college for all it's worth. I was accepted into an out-of-state college, but I decided against it because I did not want to get out of my comfort zone. After college, I tried to find a job that went along with my major, English, and found that it is pretty much impossible to get a teaching job in the town that I live in. After 4 months of looking for a job, I decided that any job was as good as any, and went to the local electronics store for my old job back. The manager was more than happy to take me back, as I was the top seller every month I was there. I don't like to go out and make friends, but I was definitely good at making people spend their money. When I came back for my first day, back 3 days later, I realized that it was a completely different crew except the manager. There were 3 salesmen, Mac, Vance, and Jonathan, and the manager, Anthony. Before I came back in, Mac was the top salesman for the past 6 months, and we automatically did not like each other. Vance was the lowest salesman, but he always cleaned the store up and made sure all of the inventory was correct. Jonathan was the middle tier salesman, and we became fast friends. There really isn't much to talk about the world of sales. People come in looking for X object, and we sell them X object while trying to add on accessories. Sometimes we would get them to loosen on their original budget and go for a higher end model. That is about as far as sales really go to me. It gets me a paycheck, and I can pay the rent my mother and father suddenly started charging me. 3 weeks into working there, Jonathan asked if I want to come over to his house and hang out and drink a couple of beers. I agreed, and after work we went there and turned on a couple movies while downing beer after beer. After about 3 hours, I decided it was time for me to go home, but Jonathan rationalized with me about the dangers of driving drunk. He brought out 2 pillows and a blanket. He pointed at the couch and I sat back down. He put the blanket and pillows beside me and told me goodnight while he walked back to his room. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I remember snapping awake. I have this thing ever since I was young, where I would slightly open my eyes in case it's already bright. But I found the room to be completely dark. I slightly glanced up trying to figure out where I was, but what I saw made me close my eyes completely and start shaking a little. Jonathan was standing in the hallway while staring at me. I waited about 10 minutes and slightly opened my eyes once more to see that he was going back to his room. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon. I quickly got out of bed and went into the kitchen. He was cooking and looking like his normal self, so I just let my paranoia slide off, and I asked him if he needed any help. With a wave of his hand, he just told me to sit down and enjoy my hangover. I sat down on the couch until he was done cooking and we ate bacon and pancakes. We went to work right after breakfast, and by the end I completely forgot about him staring at me in the middle of the night. The next weekend he asked if I wanted to go to a club an hour away from us, and without hesitation I told him yes. I told him I would wear my black suit to look extra spiffy, and while laughing he told me he would pick me up from my house at 10 p.m. Around 10:15 I heard him honking and I went outside and got into his car. When I saw him I had to take a double take. He was wearing the same exact thing as me, black suit and a white button-up shirt. I just decided to ignore it. We got to the club at 11, right as the doors were opening, and before it was midnight, I was having the time of my life. For the first time in my life, I was meeting girls that seemed to take an interest in me, and I even got to dance with a couple of them. The only thing that really threw me off was that Jonathan seemed to be staring down every single girl that even gave me a slight bit of interest. At 2 a.m., Jonathan came up to me and told me that it was time to go home. So I went to the bar to pay off my tab. While I was paying my tab, a girl that I danced with earlier came up to me and slipped a piece of paper in my pocket while giving me a light peck on the cheek. I know I blushed, but I maintained my composure enough to give her a wink and a little smile. When I got into the car, I took out the piece of paper and showed Jonathan, nearly bouncing in my seat with my excitement. I told him that she was definitely a girl that I would not mind dating. He asked me what she looked like, so I told him that she was a little shorter than me, brown hair and green eyes. Then I started to explain to him how pretty she was. But I noticed that he had changed his expression from happiness to what seemed like anger. The whole car ride was filled with awkward silences and sideways glances from Jonathan. I felt like he had gotten a bit too weird for me, so I started to avoid him at work. It worked for the first 3 days, but I noticed that he had started to follow me around. When I was driving home, I would see his car from a distance away. Sometimes when I was lying in my bed, I would spot a set of eyes coming from the set of trees in front of my house. But every single time I would walk up to the window, I would see the eyes vanish. I didn't really know it was him until I saw a figure with bright green shoes run down the street. I know Jonathan is the only person I have never seen wear bright green shoes. They were the shoes he wore whenever he went out running or whenever he exercised. I decided that the next day would be the best day to approach him and tell him that I noticed him following me after work and looking into my window. I was going to tell my only and best friend that I would really appreciate it if he could just give me some space, until I thought he was back to normal. That next day, the store was closed. The store was closed because Jonathan was found in the middle of the night by the police with a giant gaping hole in his chest. His heart was removed and placed in his mouth. Where his heart should have been was a credit card from our store. The magnetic strip was rubbed off, and the name and the card number was grinded off. On his stomach was a series of cuts to reveal a little note. Was it worth the sale? It says. I know I wanted him to give me some space, but I never wanted him to die. He was my only best friend, and the grief that filled my heart when the manager called and told me the news caused me to hang up on him and fall onto my bed. With deep sobs, I felt like the world was crashing down on me, and I never felt like he ever knew how much he really meant to me. Today is the day after Jonathan was found dead. I decided to go to the mall to clear my head. I went outside to my car and found a letter stuck in my window. I grabbed a letter and read it in my car. Hey Jan, I'm sure you noticed that I have been following you around and that I have been acting weird around you. I know on the first night you spent the night over, you saw me staring at you on the couch. I just want you to know that on the first week, Mac convinced an older woman to make an 8100 TV purchase using our store credit card. The next day, the woman came back with the TV. It had a big crack in the middle of the screen, but she told us that it had come that way. Normally, we just return it and get our money back from the manufacturer, but Mac did not want to lose out on the commission. It was the last one we had in stock and he wanted to have an upper hand on you. She started to beg and plead to just take the TV back and let her buy a cheaper model. She told him that she didn't even have money to pay the monthly bill. He just told her that she was out of luck and made her take the TV back into her car. That night, she killed herself. She was clutching a remote in her left hand and an empty bottle of pills in her right hand. The daughter came in 3 days later. It was your off day, but Mac was there. She went up to him and told him about the death of her mother. She didn't seem sad, but I could tell she was not there to ask about what can be done with the bill. With a smile, she asked who the salesman was, and the motherfucker told her it was you and described what you looked like. After that, with a smile, she skipped out the door and drove off in her red sedan. When you spent the night, I woke up to the sound of a car engine starting up around 2 a.m. I looked out the window and saw the same red sedan. When we were going to the club, I saw the red sedan following us. When you described to me about the girl that gave you her number, it matched what she looked like exactly. I just wanted to make sure you were safe, so I followed you home and I kept watch over you. Tonight, I invited her over. I took the paper she wrote you her number on and texted her. She said she will be here at 2 a.m. I know I may not be alive when you read this, but I want you to know that I love you, man. I know we haven't been friends for long, but just know that I acted like a creep around you because I wanted to make sure you were safe. Always been a bit of a lurker, but I'm coming to the one place I think can help me now. Something seriously wrong in my hometown. I've always been an explorer, and after having spent most of my younger years being raised and educated in Ohio, I struck out on my own. After 5 years in DC and almost 1 year in Florida, I've been relatively happy with my choices. But I do miss Ohio in the fall time, cold weather and all. My family all lives in Tuscarawas County, which is a small county about an hour south of Akron. So it's never been an issue when I want to go home for a long period of time. And after living on an island most of the year, it's nice to go somewhere that has a large landmass for me to explore and hike and whatnot. Which brings us to 2 weeks ago when I called my mom and asked if she'd be willing to put me up for a week so I can come to see my friend. She, being a typical mother, happily obliged. We talked about the comings and goings of small-town Dover, Ohio, and the typical neighbor gossip when she said, "The area is just changing." Me, being from there, dismissed it. Something was always going to happen, but it never quite materialized in my small hometown. I drove up a week later. Happy to be home and seeing family and friends, I spent the first 2 days bouncing all around the county. But one night I couldn't sleep and I hopped in the Jeep and decided to take a night drive. driving like a bat out of hell across those winding roads till I ended up back in town. I stopped at a local Circle K for a pop. This is the first time I noticed something was off. As I walked out of Circle K and into the parking lot, I noticed a man standing in his front yard next to the Circle K. Just standing there, staring straight ahead at the empty street in front of him. I assumed maybe he had AirPods on or something, but he made no noise. Just stood, never once turning his head. I brushed this off and of course hopped him back to my Jeep. Once started, the radio blared to life louder than I had remembered having it. I turned it down and once again looked toward the man. He was still standing, but his head had shifted to the left and he was now staring at my car. Staring at me. I could feel it. Needless to say, I noped out of there really quickly and got to my mom's. Convinced myself that it was just a weird guy and fell asleep. The next day, I happened to drive past the house again and the man was gone. Though I half expected to find him there still staring ahead, I told myself to quit being paranoid and just enjoy my time here. 2 nights later, I was at my sister's and we were talking about it. I told her about the man I had seen and to my surprise, she said the same thing my mother had said weeks earlier. Yeah, Zach, the area is changing. I asked her what she meant and all she said was, just is. After a bit more catching up, I hopped in a Jeep again and took off to Mom's. Driving through town late at night was always peaceful as the roads were usually barren, barring the occasional late night driver or two. You tend to zone out except for when you see the random red lights. Something felt off and uneasy though to me. I came to a red light and that's when I saw them. The houses lining the street on the block before me had people standing in front of them. At least one person in front of every single house. All of them standing in their front lawns, uniform, staring straight ahead. I turned off the radio and rolled down the window and slowed down in front of one of the houses where 2 people, a man and a woman, stood. Hey, you guys okay? I managed to say. Nothing. What's going on? I stammered, trying to put some bass in my voice. Still nothing. Their eyes weren't even focused on me, just staring straight ahead. Their heads didn't even move. Screw this, I thought, and sped off. Further down the road I went, desperately trying to get to my mom's and shake the creepiness factor. However, as I continued and turned off the main street, I noticed that more people were out in front of their homes. It wasn't every house, but probably 1 out of every 3. All of them staring straight ahead. To my relief, my mother's street was not experiencing this. I ran into the house. Mom, you gotta get up. Something's going on. Zach, it's 12:30. What could possibly be going on? I told her the story and she looked at me incredulously and it was obvious she didn't believe me. I begged her to come with me and I could show her. I finally coaxed her out and we got into the Jeep and I went to the areas where I had seen the people. No one was there. The streets deserted like they usually were at this hour. My mom was annoyed and complained about being pulled out of bed. I told her I knew what I had seen and that it was weird and something felt off in the town. Zach, the area is changing, she said coldly, almost as if it wasn't in her voice. I asked her what she meant, but she gave the same answer my sister had hours earlier. Just is. I pressed her for more, but she didn't say anything till we got back to her house. She told me goodnight and went to bed. I couldn't sleep. Something felt off and I felt as though those people were still out there. The next morning, I left for Cleveland, as planned, to see some friends over the course of 2 days. I stopped at Speedway to get gas that morning and was tired due to lack of sleep the night before. I went in for coffee and, to my surprise, the man standing behind the counter was the same man I had seen at the start of all this. I froze, unable to move. Does he not recognize me? I thought. No, there's no way. I walked up with my coffee and he looked at me before asking, "Anything else?" No, I stammered. He was different, fidgeting and tapping his fingers on the counter. So much movement compared to who I saw the first night. I had to say something, anything to him. I had to know if he knew me. "Hey, man, I think I saw you the other night," I managed to blurt out, my eyes avoiding his. "Where at?" he asked. "I think I saw you standing outside your house the other night around 11:30, I barely muttered. "Nah, man, couldn't have been me. I open the store and I go to bed pretty early," he replied. "Oh, must have been someone else," I managed to say, not really believing it. This was sure as shit the same guy. Lots of new people moving here, man. Don't know the whole town like I used to. The area is changing, that's for sure. As he said it, his eyes got very distant for a moment before shifting back to his cheerful demeanor. The words sent chills down my spine. What the heck was going on? My sister, my mom, and now this guy all had the same reaction with the same exact words. I grabbed my coffee and got out of there, ignoring his "Have a good one, brother," as I walked out the door. Being in Cleveland was wonderful for those 2 days, and I felt as though a giant weight had lifted off my shoulders. Life was normal again. My college friends and I went to the Cavs game and hung out and drank ourselves stupid, and overall had a great time. All those weird experiences, while in the back of my mind, felt like a distant memory. Which brings us to tonight. My mom called me around 4 and asked if I was heading home. I told her I'll still be here tonight, but she should leave the door unlocked in case I leave late. I told her I'd text her when I left Cleveland prior to the 2-hour drive. I felt a bit of paranoia living the city. Something's off back home, right? Is my mind playing tricks on me? I did my best to push the feeling down, but I couldn't shake it. This ominous sense of dread as I rolled down I-77 to a place that now terrified me. I pulled off the interstate and onto the exit around 11:30. My anxiety was borderline overwhelming, like this impending sense of dread. I went past the gas stations and turned back into the town towards my mom's place, and I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Every house had people in front of it, all of them standing lockstep in their front lawns. I couldn't believe it. It was as if the road was a red carpet and they were lining it for me and my Jeep to drive down. No one moved. No one even acknowledged the car as it rolled down the street. They all just stared straight ahead. "I have to get to my mom's and sister's now," I said. Speeding through the quiet streets, the faces not acknowledging me, just the same blank stares. Fathers, mothers, children, everyone just staring straight ahead. What was this? Why the heck are all these people out here? I finally came to my mom's street and I saw what I dreaded the most. Her and my stepfather were in front of their home, like all the others, standing there, straight-eyed at the street. I got out of the car and onto the street slowly, almost as if I was afraid of a sudden movement and that would cause the various neighbors to descend upon me. Hell, even my own parents. Who knows what the heck this is? "Mom, are you okay?" I asked in a hushed voice. "Tim?" Nothing. They just stared straight ahead. I was so scared in that moment. What was causing this? Why don't they acknowledge me? Jesus Christ, I'm her own son. Terrified and shocked, I grabbed my mom by the shoulders. We gotta get the heck out of here now, I screamed. She blinked. The first movement I had seen. Her head jerked sideways almost inquisitively as if she was trying to sort out what was happening. She opened her mouth and let out a slight gravely breath. The area is changing, she whispered. It wasn't her voice. It was a guttural, gravely voice. Suddenly I heard the sound of movement and the entire street was looking at me. All at once, they opened their mouth and let out a wail. It sounded like... there's no way to describe it. Dozens of wails from these people, these neighbors. Like dozens of people were all crying out in agony, and the sound kept increasing, almost as if the whole neighborhood was all crying out in a torture scream. I ran across the front yard as fast as I could away from my own mother and jumped in the car and sped off, the radio off as I heard the screams continue. It was the whole town. They were all looking at me, their faces shifting as my Jeep sped down the road, but all of their voices projecting out this torturous noise. I had never heard of anything like that, and I prayed I never will again. I jumped on the interstate and got the hell out of there. I drove for an hour to Akron and checked into a hotel where I am writing this. I don't know what to do. Do I go back in the daytime? Do I call the police? I have to do something. My whole entire family is there. I tried calling my sisters and no one answers. I hope they're safe, but I dare not attempt to go get them now. Not until daylight. The area may be changing, but I'll be damned if my family is going to change with it. The circle of forest is just that, a circle, about 750 meters in diameter. It's not particularly big. It is ringed by 2 meters of grassless rock, and then beyond that is the wilderness. Moss and fern and cliff and weeds. The trees and plants that grow inside the circle are thick and strange. It's raining this evening. I sit in my little hut with a mug of warm tea as the rain batters and clatters against the roof. It leaks through in one corner and drips quickly down into the bucket I placed there. My rifle rests against my leg. My hut has a direct view to the centerpiece of the forest, a dark cave-like hole in the middle of a clearing, descending down and into the unknown. I tried to go through it once, but my head began to pound the deeper I went down, to the point of agony, actually, and I was forced to retreat. I don't go down there anymore, not much point to it. My colleague joins me tonight. He sips from a mug of his own. "Ah," he says, with a pleasant smile. Delicious. Nothing like a warm mug on a cold day." I replied, scratching my beard. "What do you think might be coming up tonight?" he asked. "Who could tell? Nothing, hopefully." "It's been a while since the last one," he murmurs. "We're overdue a visitor." Yes, I suppose we are," I sighed. Visitor is darkly comical way to refer to the things that clamber out of the hole. Coined because of how crushingly lonely it can get at this particular station. I've been here for 3 months now, another 3 to go. But of course, I have Robbie here with me tonight. Someone to talk to. I missed him. The rain splashes through the leaves and into the undergrowth, and I take a final sip before setting the mug down onto the wooden little table with a low thunk. I rise to my feet. Right, let's head a little closer, shall we? Ugh, he mutters, glancing out the doorway. Into the rain? You know it, brother. He sighs. Fine. Are we splitting up or sticking together this time? It's a no-brainer. We'll stick together, I tell him. I clap him on the shoulder and gesture for the man to head outside. You know how I get lonely. He chuckles. Right you are, man. And out he goes, rifle in hand. I hoist up my own and out I go, the water splashing against my hood and my shoulders as we push through the undergrowth and a little closer towards the hole. The reason for this little pursuit outdoors is the rain itself. It is, unfortunately, obscuring our view, and whilst on a clear day I might be content to just sit in a hut and wait for one of the sensors to trigger, I also don't fully trust the sensors' effectiveness in such a weather. So out we go. The ferns brushed up against my camel-clad legs as we approach the clearing, and we take our positions beside the best lookout trees. Robbie is a little off, though. Hey, I said to him, above the rush of the rain. Looks at me. Wake up, man. You can be seen from there. Back up a little. He chuckles and rubs his head. Of course, right you are. We settle down and we wait, and we watch as water pools and puddles around the hole in the ground ahead. It's surrounded by tumbled rock and stone, though I couldn't say from where. There isn't another rock of such size in the whole circle of the forest. Perhaps someone moved them there, long ago. It's another 20 minutes before anything stirs from the hole. Robbie and I just spend the time shooting the shit. I just think you'd be much happier if you quit this business, man, Robbie said to me. Being isolated for such long periods of time, it's not healthy. How long you got left? 3 months, I tell him. So 6 months total. Half a year in such a place as this. Robbie shakes his head. You need to be around people. Humans are social creatures. Perhaps, I grunt. Robbie opens his mouth to say more, but I cut him off with a quick gesture, pointing to the hole. We both creep a little lower in our positions and watch as a shadow begins to shamble its way from the depths of the hole. The thing is covered in slime and chatters as it appears, armored, brown, and disgusting. 2 tiny beady eyes peered out as its antennae twitch and circled around. Its rows upon rows of sharp legs clatter over the rock and slice down into the wet grass and the mud. I feel a swell of revulsion rise up in my stomach, but it's okay. These types are always the easiest. I raise my rifle. Robbie does likewise, and the abomination is riddled with quick holes, its shell and flesh bursting out into the undergrowth as it screeches in fury. I suppress a gag. Disgusting, Robbie mutters. Where the hell do these things even come from? I don't bother responding. It's a question we ask each other countless times over the years, and I have my theories. From amidst the ruin of the centipede-like creature and out from the hole comes a deer. It raises its head and sniffs the air. I raise the rifle, and the deer bolts, bouncing and speeding away over the undergrowth. Fuck! I shout, hesitating as I look between the deer and my colleague. I point at him. Watch the damn hole. I'll be back. Yeah, chance would be a fine thing, but the deer is the priority for now. I take off between the trees after it. I raise the gun and fire, exploding a branch as I do so. The deer still hops speedily away. They aren't usually this fast, these things. I stumble after it, leaping over ferns and bushes, and the deer makes the mistake of turning sideways and try to AC away from me. I take the opportunity to raise the rifle to my shoulder, firing again, with a better chance of hitting, and this time I strike. Black fluid bursts from the deer's side, and the strangled, decidedly non-deer-like noises escape its throat as it crashes down to the ground with the rustle of ferns. I wipe the rain and sweat from my forehead and turn instantly back, chest rising and falling as I hastily return to the clearing. I approach from the opposite side this time, and I raise a hand to Robbie. But just as I expected, the man isn't looking. His interest is elsewhere. Staring off onto the woods, he rises to his feet. "Robbie!" I shouted at him, and he swivels to look at me. "Were you watching the hole?" The man does not respond, and movement at the clearing's edge catches both of our attentions. An anxious-looking man with a backpack and waterproof trousers shuffles out from between the trees, a crumpled map in one hand. Hello?" he says, looking between Robbie and I. I raise my rifle at once, and Robbie does likewise. I begin making my way around the clearing's edge towards my colleague, barrel of the weapon fixed carefully on a stranger. Hey!" he says in alarm, putting up his hands. I don't understand. You guys are rangers, right? I'm not a poacher or anything like that." He forces out an awkward laugh. "I'm just lost. Honestly, literally. I'm literally lost." "Where are you from?" I ask him. I'm sorry?" the man replies, adjusting his glasses. "I didn't realize I had an accent." A poor attempt at a joke, another weak laugh. "Tell me where you're from right now or I'll blow your head off." I tell the stranger plainly as I reach my position beside Robbie. "Speak clearly." I'm from Oberdebrand," the man mutters. "What?" I reply, jerking the rifle. "I said speak clearly." Oberdebrand," the man replies, raising his voice, the terror in his face quite evident. "That isn't a real place," I tell him. "What country?" I don't... "What damn country?" "This country, obviously. Please, this isn't funny. Just let me go, alright? I'll find my own way, please." I exchanged a look with Robbie. "Tell me the name of any country, hiker. That's all I want to know." The man shakes where he stands as the rain pours down through the trees. He mutters and stutters, and eventually he manages to speak, though his words are a string of nonsense. I take quick aim and pull the trigger, and a hole appears in the center of the man's forehead. He drops like a brick as black fluids bursts and spurts from his face, his skin twitching and crawling as a massive insect-like leg bursts from his ribcage. I spit onto the ground. "Jesus," Robbie murmurs. I consider chiding the man for allowing the creature through, but there's no point really. So I let it go. The corpse twitches in the grass beneath the rain. "Alpdebrand," Robbie repeats. "Do you think it's a real place, or did he just made it up? A random combination of sounds? Who can say, man?" I replied, shrugging. "Your guess is as good as mine." Robbie says nothing further. We sit side by side and watch the hole for another 30 minutes. We are quieter this time, but still, it's nice just to have his company. The rain falls. "I gotta take a piss, man," Robbie says, breaking the silence. He clambers to his feet. "Hey, don't go too far. Just piss right there." "Eh?" "I need you alert and active, my man. Just piss right there." Robbie hesitates and gives me a look before shaking his head. "Alright, man. I'll try not to turn around too fast. Wouldn't want to hit you with my massive dick and knock you out." I chuckle as he relieves himself against a tree, a chuckle which is quickly lost as a horde of shadowy beings begin stampering out of the hole. "Action, Robbie," I tell him. "Quick, stay alert." The shadowy beings quickly take shape through the rain. They are all exactly copies of myself. They don't make a break for the exit. They run to me. Fuck. "Soldier!" One of the copies shouts into my face, grabbing me by the shoulders. "Jesus, thank God you're alive. Right, Come with us immediately. There's still time to get you to safety. I shove him away and raise the rifle. My copy stares at the barrel, then at me, and then swears and throws out his hands. Again? For fuck's sake, why does he keep doing this? He turns to another of my copies and gives him a light shove in the chest. Why won't he just come back? What are we doing wrong? I choose not to partake in this little piece of theater. I take aim and fire, bursting a hole in my copy's neck. Initially, the blood is red, which is rather worrying, but it quickly runs black as he falls gasping on the floor. The other copies of myself all retreat in panic. There are 5 more of them. "Robbie!" one of them shouts, gesturing to my colleague. "Tell him to come back already. We can't keep doing this." Robbie stutters and mutters, and I fire. The copy's head bursts open. Down he goes. 2 of the surviving copies attempt a hasty escape, back to the hole, which I find interesting, but not interesting enough to spare them. Down they go, one after the other. Bang! Bang! 2 left now. They looked at each other, and the closest holds out a hand to me. "Listen," he says carefully as I reload. "I know this seems impossible and scary." He's right. I'm fucking terrified, though I'm doing my best not to show it. These things really are getting creative. "But you have to trust us on this, or at least hear us out, please. Do you have any idea how long you've been gone?" The other copy shouts in anger. "He's not gonna listen. It's just like last time." The closest copy stares right into my eyes. "I don't care what the others say," he tells me. "I will never leave you behind. I swore it once, and it's a promise I intend to." Bang! I blow the imposter to kingdom come. His comrade panics and slips on the wet grass as he tries to run, and I gun him down. His lifeless body thuds to the ground, his skin twitching in various and unsettling places, as if being pressed or stretched from the inside. I put a couple of bonus bullets in him for good measure. Robbie looks over to me and studies my face. Are you good, man?" he asks after a moment. "Yeah," I reply, lying. "Yep." I stare at the faces of my copies. Corpses now. I try not to dwell on it. I glance over to Robbie. Perhaps I've let this little charade go on far too long. Robbie pales and stares right past me at the hole. I turn to follow his gaze. 3 figures clamber out, one waving a white flag. "Wait!" one calls above the roar of the rain. I squint through it for a better look. "Don't shoot!" It's me, again, another copy. Though this one is at least 2 decades older. A copy of Robbie is with him, similarly aged. A girl in her 30s walks with them, a fearful expression on her face and her hands raised. It's my daughter, a sick copy at the least, and aged up just like the others. I throw my hands out, exasperated. "What do you want?" "Listen to me, you fool," my elder copy shouts back. "This is the real me, the real you. And this is the real Robbie, the real Robbie." He puts a hand on the copy of Robbie's shoulder, and his other on my daughter's. She stares at me, wide-eyed. "He looks so young," she says. She calls over. "Dad, it's me. Do you remember? Please tell me you remember. Remember the trip we took to the beach? You took us to the coast on my 10th birthday. We saw dolphins." She reaches up to her neck and lifts a necklace with a smooth, tiny, shiny pebble attached. "You let me keep this pebble. We had it turned into a necklace." "Things are about to change," my copy says to me, walking ever closer. "Things beyond your understanding. And the truth of this hole barely scratched the surface. It's a passage. I think you realize this. A passage to places beyond and between. Sometimes to other planes. Yes, but the tunnels run deep. They loop back around." He slams his hands to his chest. "I'm babbling. I appreciate that this might not make any sense to you, but we are from the same loop. The same path, looped back around. I take a deep breath. I look this madman in the eyes, with the scent of the rain-washed pine and the drift of rifle smoke in my nose. I take aim, and I fire. Bang! My so-called future self drops to the ground. My daughter screams, and the elderly copy of Robbie drops to his knees at the corpse. No, no, he cries, and I take him out as well. The copy of my daughter is the hardest. Shaking where she stands, she turns to stare at me, defiant, daring me to shoot in cold silence. It doesn't have to be this way, she says, her voice wavering. I chew my tongue, and then I call her bluff. Bang! Down she goes. Just another leaking corpse. Robbie stares at the ruined bodies. The trees rustle in the rain as the blast of rifle ring in our ears. He looks to me. How do you do it? He murmurs. How the fuck do you do it? I rub a sleeve across my eyes. Do not allow anything to escape, I tell him. It's a rule for a reason. You do it so easily, he says quietly, the disgust in his voice quite clear. Is that what you think? I ask him. I turn to face him, my jaw set as the rain leaks from the chin. Tell me, Robbie, tell me what I am doing is wrong. Should I be letting these things and these abominations out into the world? And where do they come from, exactly? If where they're coming from is so great, then why leave at all? If there's something worse that's pushing them away, then that's all the more incentive to just keep shooting. I don't know which one of these horrors is the worst, so better safe than sorry. What if they have something important to tell us? He asks me. Important? Fuck them. It's all tricks and lies. The second I let my guard down, I am lost. And speaking of which, I raise the rifle and point it at his head. He backs away. Wait, hold on. He laughs anxiously, then stops when he realizes that I'm not kidding around. You got mad, he says simply. You lost yourself in the head. It's me. It's Robbie. If the things that come off of the ground are benevolent, then why do they all lie, Robbie? Why do they lie? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, my friend. I cocked the rifle. I've enjoyed your company tonight. I really have. You were a strong imitation, I'll give you that. But you've missed a crucial piece of information. You always miss something. Robbie is dead. Long dead. Died 2 years ago. He died defending the people of this place from an abomination that rose out of the yonder hole. So I'll be seeing you now. Robbie's face contorts into shock and surprise. Please, he begins, and I put a bullet through his forehead with a loud bang. He crumbles. Down he goes, just like the rest of them. That terrible black fluid pouring out and over the grass, oversized, yet still only half-formed insect leg burst from his shoulders and neck, twitching in the rain. I lift my face to the sky and take a slow deep breath. When Robbie first appeared to me this evening from through the trees, I was too surprised to react. It was a potentially fatal mistake, but for one reason or another the copy did not use his rifle to shoot me. If he was going to use it to kill me, he could have done so in that very first instant. He didn't, so after that, I just played along, keeping an eye on him. As I said, it gets real lonely up here, and I miss that man a great deal. The rain's letting up a little now. I watch as black sludge begins bubbling up from the hole's entrance, and I return to my hut, sitting down with a sigh in my chair as water drips from the branches and into the bucket beside me. The corpses will have melted away by morning. There won't be any more visitors tonight. The black sludge means that the tunnel needs time to recharge. I reach for my mug and take a slow sip of cold, miserable tea. 3 months down, 3 more to go. I work in a hospital call center. It's not great work, but it pays the bills. Working for a hospital call center, you get a lot of calls during your 8-hour shift. Usually, it was just people trying to find a relative who might be there, or someone trying to schedule an appointment in the surgery department, or maybe even people seeking medical advice. I'm apparently not qualified to do any of those things. So the job becomes a lot of one moment while I transfer you. Then they are sent to the desired department. You get a lot of angry people too. Mostly looking for the billing department because the hospital dared to charge them for their services. Those people are best sent off quickly before they can get a good head of steam under them. There are 4 to 6 of us in the basement at any given time. Mostly college kids or older people. And in all, I think around 10 of us work the switchboard. We take turns covering the midnight shift, most of us working the day or mid-shift primarily. And at the end of the month, we all walked away with a nice chunk of overtime for our trouble. People being people, there's always 12 to 16 hours of overtime a month. The job is easy. Really like having a job where I could finish my schoolwork or play on my phone for 8 to 16 hours and still get paid. That was before the heavy breather. Ugh, pervert. I turned to see Mary setting down her headset and making a notation in the call log. The notations were supposed to be for strange and unusual calls. And for the last few months, most of the entries have been for a heavy breather. We had named the caller that because their calls were all the same. You pick up the phone and hear the telltale heavy breathing on the other end and know what was going on. We all just figured it was some pervert, some lonely sicko trying to get his rocks off to someone on the other end. You'd hang up before he could get the satisfaction and make a note of it in a logbook. I say these things like they were regular occurrences, but in truth, I had yet to get the mystery caller. Every other operator had gotten him at least twice, sometimes 3 or 4, but I had never managed to see what all the fuss was about. He say anything this time? I asked her without really expecting any great revelations. Just heavy breathing as usual. I wish this pervert could get a life and find someone else to bother. I agreed, though I'd never spoken to him. I knew he was a nuisance, but secretly I wished I could get this mystery caller like everybody else. I wanted to be part of the outrage. I knew it was petty, but I wanted to hear the ragged breaths on the other end. I wanted to be like everybody else who's gotten a call, but I look back now and wish I never heard of the mystery caller. I would get my wish 3 days later. 3 days of midnight? My boss shrugged at me as she sank the push pins into the bulletin board. She posted our schedule by hand every week, despite the rest of the hospital having access to an electronic payroll system that generates the schedule for the week. Martha is old school though, probably been there since they pulled her out of the foundation when they broke ground, and she's one of the best bosses I've ever had. She doesn't like how short-handed we are any more than we do. Sorry, Roger says that he's taking the weekend off to go visit his boyfriend. I swear I'd fired him on the spot if we weren't so short-handed. You're the only one with an open schedule, kid. I'll give you the next weekend off if you want it. Scout's honor. Martha couldn't have known that this would likely be the last weekend I have ever sat behind the desk. Friday night went normally. I arrived at 11 p.m., brewed a thermos of coffee, and got to my desk around 11:15. Jordan and Aiden were there, finishing up their calls or cleaning up their stations as they waited for midnight. We chatted a little as I logged on, discussing call volumes and talked about tonight's call-in schedule. Apparently, there was a team I needed to call in for at 4 a.m. for a 5 a.m. case, and they added that the heavy breather had been calling a lot today. They don't say anything, they just keep calling about once an hour like they're looking for someone. Pam swears she heard them say a name before they hung up, but Pam likes to make stuff up for attention. I got a little excited when Jordan told me that. If they were calling more often, then maybe I get to talk to them. I know it's weird to hope that a crazy pervert would call you up and breathe on the phone, but I really wanted the experience. I felt like it would make me like everyone else, and I was a little sore that I hadn't gotten them yet. I would get my wish about an hour later. It was about 12:30 when they called. I was sitting in the call center basement, sipping coffee and checking Reddit on my phone, when I heard the computer chirp and inform me that I had a call. It was from an unlisted number, not that uncommon, and when I picked it up, it sounded like someone was sitting too close to a fan or driving with the window down. The blowing was annoying, but I was a professional, and I tried to power through it. Southwest Medical Center, how may I help you? The noise on the other end sounded different slightly. I realized that it wasn't a fan, but rain, coming down hard on a window somewhere. Was it raining outside? It hadn't been when I came in. There hadn't been a cloud in the sky. The rain covered it slightly, but as I sat in silence, I began to hear the deep breathing on the other end. There he was. There was the weird caller. Hello, Southwest Medical. Can I help you? The breathing persisted, overtopped by the rain that hit hard on the windows of wherever they were. I reached for the book to start scribbling down the usual message when I heard something over the phone. I heard a voice. I'm sorry? I asked, taken aback. It's always dark here. The pen fell out of my hand. No one had ever heard this person talk before. It was always just heavy breathing for a couple of minutes before they hung up. Had they been waiting for something? I wondered for a moment if they talked before and maybe no one had told me. Was I the first one they talked to? It's always dark here, they repeated, and this time I stopped thinking and started listening. Where are you? I asked, not sure what else to say. The rain is so loud tonight, they said. The voice was neither male or female and sounded low and growly, like someone getting over a cold. Look, I'm not sure who you are, but you called a hospital. If you need some help, I'll be happy to assist you, but otherwise I need to... Cherish says hi, the voice whispered. That made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I had a sister named Cherish. She was about 12, and as far as I knew, she was asleep at my parents' house. I shook off the fear and began to become angry. Whoever this was, they were obviously having a laugh on my account, and it really wasn't funny. Who is this? Roger? If this is you, then I swear to God, I'm going to the HR. This isn't even a little bit funny, and if you need to... But that's when the line went dead. I held the phone against my ear for a few more seconds before putting it in the cradle, and looking around nervously. I expected Roger or Jordan to pop out of the break room with their cell phone, laughing because they had spooked me, but all the company I got was the sound of air conditioning cycling overhead. I sat for a few more minutes, drumming my fingers and trying to forget the call, but the more I thought about it, the weirder it got. My coworkers would have called back to make fun of me if this was just a prank. If it wasn't them, then some stranger on the phone had called me up and said my sister's name. Coincidence or not, I needed to be sure. My mom picked up on the fourth ring and I could hear Dad grumbling in the background. "Hello?" she asked. "Mom? Hey, sorry, is Cherish okay?" I know that's a weird question, but I could hear Mom sitting up in bed. "Are you okay? You sound very upset. Just please answer me. Is Cherish okay?" "I don't know, hun. She's asleep, away camp this week." My blood ran cold. "I need you to call down there and make sure she's okay." "Hun, what's all this about?" she asked groggily. I got a weird call a minute ago, and now I have to make sure she's okay." My phone rang, and I looked at the number. Unknown name and unknown number. It couldn't be them again. "Mom, I need to call you back. Just promise me you'll call the camp and make sure she's okay." Mom said she would, and I hung up and picked the phone back up. I was immediately bombarded by the sound of rain on glass and muffled heavy breathing. The caller's voice sounded watery, slurry, like they recently choked on some water. They sounded like someone with a sore throat and a bad case of pneumonia, like a drowned person. "Hello? Who is this?" "Cherish needs your help." I gritted my teeth and tried not to scream into the phone. "Whoever this is, you need to stop. I am not amused and you are not funny. I want you to..." "He's gone to get her. She thinks he's her friend, but he isn't. He wants to hurt her. You have to stop her." "Who has gone to get her?" "The woodsman. He's a bad man, and he wants your sister." I didn't have the slightest idea who this person was talking about, but whatever their game was, I was starting to freak out. "Look, this isn't funny. If this is a joke or something, it's really gone to..." Line went dead then, and I was left with static. I spent the next hour in a fitful state. I didn't want to call Mom back and bother her with this. But what if whoever that was wasn't kidding around? Surely my sister wasn't stupid enough to just go off with someone in the woods, right? I didn't know, and that lack of knowledge made me nervous. I began to feel the walls of the basement closing in on me, and the claustrophobic feeling made me shake. When the phone rang again, I caught it on the first ring without even looking. "Hello?" I could hear the quaver in my voice. The ring was softer now, but the voice was no less intrusive. "He has her!" It all but screamed at me, and I thought I could hear someone in the background crying and screaming just under the raspy husk. "He's hurting her! Please hurry! Where are you?" I screamed, almost crushing the phone in my hand. "Where has he taken her?" If this was a prank, I was buying in hook, line, and sinker. I could hear someone, a small girl it sounded like, screaming and crying as someone did God knows what to her. My cell phone roared to life. I looked down to see that it was Mom and picked it up without thinking. Mom was hysterical on the other end. She and Dad went in the car and driving up to the camp. The counselors had gone to check on Cherish and found her bed empty. What's more, they found muddy boot tracks going into her cabin and then leaving out the same way. They can't seem to track them. The rain here has been torrential, but the state police are bringing in the tracking dogs, and they're going to get started as soon as they can. "She's in the woods, Mom. Someone has her," I sputtered, still hearing the screams on the phone. Mom was silent for a few breaths. "How do you know that?" "I got a caller on the phone who says she's alive, but it sounds like he's hurting her. They're in the woods, Mom. Tell them to search the woods." She hung up on me, and when I picked up the phone, it had gone dead again. I sat in the silence and felt utterly impotent. Should I leave and go help them look? My job wasn't really the thing holding me here. I was sure people would understand if I abandoned my post, but I was hoping that the mystery caller would give me more information. Every second counted now. If my information could help them find her a little quicker, then all the better. I muddled through a few late night calls while I waited, and I'm sure the people on the other end could tell I was tense. After an hour, Mom called to let me know that they have arrived. The rain had made it very difficult for the dogs to find the trail, but they had started searching the woods anyway. The police were confident they could locate her, but Mom wasn't so sure. She sounded scared and tired and just plain defeated. When she hung up, I stared at the phone on my desk and willed the mystery caller to call me. They had been so chatty before. Why had they gone silent now? I pulled up call logs on my computer then and started trying to find the number. No name, no number was all I ever got through. I know in movies the police can easily decode these private numbers, but I work for a hospital, and not even the emergency part of the hospital. My resources were limited to what I could do on the out-of-date computer I had been given to work with. When the phone rang 20 minutes later, I looked at the number and almost knocked it off the desk in my haste. No name, no number. Hello? Where are you? I need you to... He's killing her, the voice whispered harshly. He's trying to make it last, but he's killing her. Where are you? The police are looking for her, but I need to know where you are. The voice went silent for a moment, and I thought I had lost him again. On the other end, I could hear whimpering, and the person making those noises sound broken. Hot tears ran down my face as I listened to what could be my sister's final breaths, and I began to beg the voice to tell me where they were. I lay my head against the desk and cried, and let the tears flow as the voice seemed to contemplate how to answer me. When played here, it was about a mile from the camp, over a creek, past the blackberry fields, and up a little hill. His house is at the top of that hill. I've been here for so long, though, I don't know if any of those things are still there. Please hurry, she doesn't have much longer. The line went dead then. I called my mom and gave her the information. When she related to some of the counselors, they knew exactly what she was talking about. The house belonged to the groundskeeper, and he had lived there for a long time. She said the police were on their way now to check it out, and she asked me to thank the person on the phone if they called back. I waited for an hour, another long and agonizing hour, and when my cell phone rang, the number made my skin crawl. Unknown name, unknown caller. Were they calling my cell phone this time? That seemed very unlikely, and when I picked it up, I was greeted not by the raspy voice of a sick child, but by the stony voice of Officer Darroway from the state police. He told me they had found Cherish and the groundskeeper in his cabin. She's not in a good way. The bastard used the time he had for some pretty upsetting things. She's alive, and we're sending her by life flight to the nearest hospital. The one you worked at, I believe. I thanked him and told him to tell my parents that I would be waiting for her when she got here. Your mother tells us that you've been in contact with another child, and that they gave you the directions to find your sister. Yes, she just called me out of the blue. I don't even know how she knew my number. He was silent for a moment. You'll forgive me for saying so, but that seems highly unlikely. I was puzzled. How do you mean? The groundskeeper didn't have a phone in his cabin. His cell phone was on his person when we recovered him, and there were no other children in the cabin. That's impossible. They said they had been there for a very long time. They've been calling for weeks. Look, I appreciate you helping us find your sister, but this whole story seems very far-fetched. That being said, I don't think we have found your sister without your help. I want to take a statement from you when we get there, but just know that we don't consider you in any way connected with this, despite the oddness of your claim. I thanked him and he hung up. I was getting ready to call Marta, the 6 a.m. person, so she could come in early to relieve me when a familiar caller popped up on my screen. No name, no number, and I picked it up as I prepared to thank the caller for their help. I had just started thanking them when I heard a heavy breathing on the other end and stopped. The sound was completely different. The caller had a husky tone to his breathing, and you could clearly hear their breaths jacking up and down as they went about whatever they were doing. This was no child's breathing. This was an adult, and I hung up the call before I could think about it too much. I sat there in a daze as I pulled the call log towards me. I logged a heavy breather, but thought for a moment about recording the other caller too. They had saved my sister's life, whoever they had been, and I thought better of adding them to the log. I called Marta and told her what had happened. She agreed to come in for me, and I said I'll see her soon before I hung up. I'm sitting with my sister now in the ICU, but I can't help but wonder who that mystery caller was. How do they know where to find me? My sister is heavily sedated right now, but I'm a little afraid of what she might tell me when she comes out. Does she know who the girl is? Did she tell her how to contact me? I'm afraid to go back to work now. I'm afraid of who else might call me when I again man the desk. What other lost souls might be just a phone call away? I remember that half-awake moment of confusion very vividly. I groaned, blinked, and moved my mouth around. As I stared up at the dark ceiling, there was some sort of weird hair or something on my lip. Pulling at it, I felt a subtle, slippery tug in my throat, and it took another 3 seconds to slide the whole thread out. Disgusted and confused, I held it up to the silver of moonlight coming in the window. What the hell was this thing? Some unknown girl's hair? No, it was wispier than that. More reflective and a little stickier. I felt suddenly queasy as the thought occurred to me that this was probably a silken spider thread. Had I just eaten a spider in my sleep? Jesus Christ! I got up that night, refusing to go back to sleep, but the day's light dispelled my silly fears. If I had eaten a spider, it was long dead by now thanks to the stomach acid generously donated by my night-long anxiety. A few weeks passed and I mostly forgot about the incident. I noticed that very slowly I began having trouble exercising at my usual rate. I was sleeping worse and groggy even when I did sleep. I thought that it might just be the season or allergies, and I tried to ignore it until I fell asleep at work and my boss sternly told me to go to the doctor. I was never one for the doctor, but I was tired of being tired, so I finally manned up and went. I sat in the stark white office waiting for quite some time. I figured the doctor probably wouldn't have any answers for me. They never seemed to care enough to pursue individual mysteries. But I was hoping for a prescription or something. I sat still as the nurse did all the usual tests. Blood pressure, pulse, and so on. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She left and I waited some more. Finally, the doctor walked in and greeted me without looking. She asked about my symptoms, nodded a bit, and then used a stethoscope to listen to my chest. That's when she frowned. It might be allergies or even asthma. Sounds a bit scratchy in there. That's what I thought, I told her. I've been racking my brain. Hell, for a while I even thought it was a spider that I ate. She glanced up at me, making eye contact for the first time. You ate a spider? In my sleep, I think. She hesitated. There's this new spider infestation, African, I think. We had a couple bad reactions to bites. Total long shot here, but if it bit your esophagus or stomach, you wouldn't feel it. But you could still have a reaction. Let's get a soft tissue scan done. Confused and worried, but hopeful, I followed her advice and went to the next building over in the complex for the scan. The hour queue allowed me to fill out every form and exhausted every magazine in the small waiting room before they finally called me up. I followed the attendant warily into the imaging room. I seen it on television, sure, but the experience was far more intense than it looked. I had to lie still for quite some time, fighting all sorts of sudden urges to itch, sneeze, or cough. By the time it was over, I felt a built-up coughing fit coming on. The smiling attendant came in, told me I did a great job, and started checking things. All right, I sighed. It was over. Time to get up and get out of here. Another attendant peeked into the door. A doctor stood behind him. They both motioned for their colleague, and I found myself momentarily alone. I sat up, watching them confer in hushed tones just outside. The three approached me. We're going to need you to come with us real quick. It's not an emergency. We just need to speak to you in private. Feeling hot from my approaching coughing fit, I followed them to a small room where they directed me to sit and handed me a biohazard waste bin. I want you to close your eyes and cough into this trash can, alright, son? The doctor told me, his tone quavering. And whatever you do, keep your eyes closed. It's important that you don't look for, radiological reasons from the imaging machine. Yeah, the machine, an attendant echoed, gulping. Their masked fear had my pulse racing, but I was more than ready to start coughing to ease the pain in my throat. Leaning over the waste bin, I began a heavy hacking cough, letting out endless choking breaths that seemed filled with weird dust and particulates. Had I accidentally breathed in something radioactive from the machine? I kept coughing. I tasted a little blood. I paused. I breathed in and out. I kept coughing. I tasted a little blood. They urged me to keep coughing, their voices shaking and subtly disgusted. Come on, just a little more, son, the doctor told me. His practiced hand trembled on my shoulder. The last cough seemed to spasm my whole body, and I felt clotted particulates rising up my throat and finally escape. Spitting and pushing more air out through my mouth, I got the last of it out of me. Feeling much better, I made the mistake of relaxing and opened my eyes. The doctor saw me staring down and gripped my shoulders tight. Don't panic. You're safe now. It's just that we saw the note about a spider you ate, and we did look at your stomach, but your stomach was fine. It was, well, they're attracted to moving air, you see, and it had made webs and laid eggs, thousands of eggs, in your lungs. In shock, I nodded, unable to do anything but stare at the 3-inch thick pile of baby spiders rolling around in the bottom of the waste bin. So let me start off by saying that I'm not willing to disclose exactly where the events of this sighting took place, but I can say that I live in the US. The town I live in is not densely populated, but it's not a rural countryside either. Just a nice peaceful urban town. There's only one thing that's a little special about my town, and that's the rain. We get a lot of rain, and I mean a lot. About 3 or 4 times a year we get a rainstorm so bad that my town had to implement special drains and flood prevention systems, just so there wouldn't be disasters. The rain is so bad during these storms that you can't even see more than a few feet in front of you, so it makes driving or traveling anywhere practically impossible. Our town has nicknamed these types of storms we get a few times a year as mega rainstorms, or MRS for short. The news is always warning about the next MRS weeks in advance. The police and fire department strongly advise the entire town to stay in their homes and don't dare to come out until the storm is over. I've lived here all my life and I would always ask my parents about the storms. They told me to never go out in them, that it's too dangerous. So back when I was a kid, I would always ignore the storm and stay inside to play games. There was no point looking out the window at it, because the rain was so dense that visibility was terrible. I'm 21 now and I've never even once dared to leave the house during an MRS. But that changed yesterday. Yesterday was a mega rainstorm and it started around 5 p.m. I was already inside and watching TV when at about 5:43 p.m. I got a text from my best friend, Sean. He said he was caught out in the storm driving home and he couldn't see anything. He ended up running into a telephone pole and his car was stuck. He called the police, but they told him that they couldn't respond in the storm. So he was asking if I could come by to help him and take him back to my place until the storm is over. I didn't really want to go out in the middle of the storm, but Sean's always had my back when I needed him, so I decided to go help. Sean told me what street he was on and it was only about 10 blocks away, so I decided it would be best not to drive. With no visibility, it actually might be better for me to walk so I wouldn't get into an accident. I put on my rain boots and grabbed my umbrella. For the first time in all my 21 years, I was finally gonna go out during a mega rainstorm. It was honestly a scary thought, and I was getting anxious. I opened the front door, and the first thing that hit me was the sound. The sound of rain hitting the ground was so loud. It was like nothing I heard before. I opened my umbrella and stepped out of my house and immediately felt the weight and pressure of the water falling down on it. I could barely see anything outside of the radius of my umbrella. The entire town seemed completely vacant. Everyone was inside. No cars on the road, no other people walking like I was. I started slowly making my way towards the street Sean was on, making sure I stayed on the sidewalk so that I wouldn't lose the street and get lost. It wasn't until I got about 4 blocks away from my house when I saw a dark outline of what appeared to be the figure of another person in the distance. They happened to be in the direction I was going, so I slowly started to get closer. And when I did, I could roughly make out that it was a figure of a man, a tall man. He didn't have an umbrella and he wasn't moving either. He was just standing there at the corner of the block. Once I finally got about 10 feet from the man, I saw that he was about 6.5 feet tall, and he wore a long black coat that went almost all the way down to his shoes. The collar of his coat was flared up so high I couldn't see his face from the side, and atop his head he wore a black fedora-style hat. I found it a bit weird that someone would even dare to come out in a storm without an umbrella. As I passed by the man, however, I noticed something that made me freeze. I couldn't see his face. There was nothing there but darkness. But possibly even more disturbing was, despite the imminent downpour, he was completely dry. The water looked like it was just repelling right off his clothes, leaving him completely bone dry. The man didn't move or look at me at all as I slowly walked past him. I was freaked out and I started to walk faster, trying to get away from him quickly. After I walked another block, I looked behind me and the man was gone. I started wondering if I was just stressing out being in this rainstorm and the anxiety got to me. After walking a few more blocks, I started to calm down and dismiss the things I saw as nothing more than just anxiety. Just when that thought crossed my mind, I saw another figure walking the same direction I was on the other side of the street. This person wasn't as tall and they had an umbrella on, so I knew it couldn't be the same man from before. I didn't pay them any mind as we both walked on opposite sides of the street from each other for another block or so. When I looked over at them this time though, I saw a figure walking behind the person with the umbrella. It didn't take me long to recognize this familiar figure as tall man from before. I was shocked. How could he have walked all the way here and caught up to us that quickly? I watched from the other side of the street as the tall man slowly got closer and closer to the figure with the umbrella, until eventually he was right behind him. It was then that the tall man in his dark coat reached out with both his arms and grabbed the person and pulled him in tight. A large cloud of dark blue and black smoke enveloped them, and when the smoke dispersed, the tall man and the person were gone. His umbrella fell onto the ground with a clack as I stood there in disbelief. I started to think I was dreaming and that this was some sort of nightmare, but the occasional rain and wind hitting my face while under the umbrella reminded me that this was no nightmare. At this point, I was so scared and started walking faster and faster, just trying to get to Sean as quick as possible. I only made it another block when I saw the tall, dark figure coming straight towards me on the same side of the street. Chills ran down my spine and I immediately turned around and started running back to my house. By now, even with all the flood drains around, there was a 2 or 3 inch layer of water across the whole street and sidewalk. This, combined with the imminent rainfall, caused me to lose my footing. I fell down and got soaked as I lost grip of my umbrella. I looked back and the dark figure was getting closer. Panicking and stumbling to my feet, I just took off without the umbrella. After a block, I saw an alleyway and that had a roof and looked like a shortcut back to my neighborhood. I took it and was finally able to get out of the relentless downpour. Looking back at the tall man again, I noticed something even more chilling. He appeared to be phasing in and out of reality, almost like he was teleporting a few feet at a time. No wonder he was catching up to me so quickly, even though he was only walking. He had already made it into the alleyway I was taking. I mustered my courage and turned around to start shouting at him, telling him to go away and leave me alone. However, my resolve was broken when I saw him clearly walking through puddles and not making any ripples in the water at all. Whatever this dark figure was, it was clearly not human. At this point, I was absolutely terrified. Was I gonna die out here from whatever the hell this thing is? I just ran as fast as I could back to my house, trying my hardest not to slip on all the water everywhere. When I exited the alleyway, I was relieved to see that I was only 1 block away from my house. I looked back at the figure and noticed he was now closer than ever, only about 30 feet from me. Fearing for my life, I ran faster than I ever had before, desperately trying to get back to my house, but the rain was making it hard to see. I was so tired and out of breath, I felt like I was gonna pass out when I finally made it to my door. I reached in my pocket for my keys, which was now completely soaked along with the rest of my clothes. The keys slipped out of my hands and landing on the ground. I reached down trying to grab them, panicking, not wanting to turn around and look, fearing he was gonna be right behind me. I just picked them up, finally find the right key and opened the door. I ran inside and slammed the door shut and locked it. I took a deep breath and looked out my living room window. I saw the tall man in his long dark coat and hat standing on the other side of the street outside my house. He was just standing there, staring at me, completely dry like he was never out in the rain at all, until the same large cloud of dark blue and black smoke covered him. And when it cleared, he was gone. I took another deep breath, still in shock over what I just experienced. I kept wondering, why didn't a dark figure grab me when I was so close to it? I was no more than 10 feet from him when I first get a good look at him. He could have easily grabbed me there, so why didn't he? Who was the person they grabbed a hold of earlier? What happened to them? I grabbed my phone and went to text Sean and tell him about what happened. But when I unlocked my phone, I saw something. A text from Sean, and it read, "Hey, never mind. I actually just found an umbrella in my glove compartment. I'm gonna try to walk and make my way to your house. See you in a bit." Sent 10 minutes ago. I text back telling Sean he needs to stay in his car and not to set foot out in the storm. I never got a reply. It has now been 2 weeks and no one, including myself, has seen or heard from Sean at all. I went to the street and found his car empty as if stranded. A search was conducted to find him, but they were unsuccessful in finding any trace of him at all. I never told anyone about what happened to me out there, and what probably came of my best friend, fearing people would think I was losing my mind. But I know what really goes on out there during these storms. I know what really happened to Sean, and I missed him. I wish I could have seen that text sooner to warn him of the Rain Man. There is no free will. Those are the first words I ever read. I woke to them every day for many years. They were written on a sign. The sign was hung above the opposite row of bunks in the sleeping barn. I have no memories from before the farm. I assumed I was just born here. None of the children there knew why we were here or where we came from. Nobody even knew how long we had been at the farm. Some children aged, some didn't. I can't remember much, but that's what happens when you're not given too much to remember. I remember always being deliriously hungry. We would be fed 3 small meals a day, but before everyone, Headmaster Ranon Xenon would make us watch him sprinkle a few drops of clear liquid from a label-less brown bottle on the food. Then he would serve behind the steel door and slide out each meal through a window. So you never knew if your meal was poison. Most of us danced around the edges of their food. Nobody was eager to dive in. Not when we had seen a dozen kids turn blue and die in front of us after picking the wrong meal. Several of us rarely ate the food. I never ate from my plate. I would scavenge what little clean scraps there were in the garbage. I ate 4 crows. They are just as disgusting as saying implies. And I would go full Reinfeld and eat flies, ants, dandelions, cockroaches, clovers, pillbugs, anything living and somewhat edible. I would keep the spiders. I had a special place for those. The 20 boys and 30-odd girls worked the fields that provided all the food to the farm. A crumbling wood compound fenced by tall barbed wire and the surrounding woods. Past that, the wilderness. Even though there wasn't spotlights or guards, the farm was much more inescapable than the prison. Every few weeks, Headmaster Xenon would take the near 100 of us to the edge of his farm, where he would blow a strange brass whistle. Bloodshot German shepherds sprang from the underbush as if they had been waiting for his call, mouths foaming as they gnashed their teeth on the rusted barbed wire, threatening to break in and chew us alive as the headmaster coldly smiled and spoke with a voice that sounded like gunshots fired far away. "Their old guard dog's gone rabid. I have learned through one of you how to train them, and they only obey me. And if you run, they will kill you or make you wish you stay here with me." The farm never had answers. Very few people came. The rare delivery trucks, a prison bus, a black tinted window, Thunderbird that made a powerful turbine roar, as if rocket engines were installed under the hood, and they only dealt with the headmaster, the only person to leave with the driver of the Thunderbird. There was a rumor that we were not real kids at all. The headmaster Xenon was a demon who crafted us all from blood and ash. We never dared speak to the headmaster, and asking a question was ludicrous, as a question would mean a touch from his hand, cruel hand, a hand that made the surrounding air a pincushion of pain, that would sting your skin even if his hand grazed yours. But above the poisonings, back-breaking labor and cleaning, scavenging for food and never knowing a single day what was going on, we feared the nights worst of all. Being exhausted from working in the fields all day wasn't enough to overcome the fear to sleep. When it was darkest and the air had fallen still, we would hear the headmaster's creaking footsteps just appear in the center of the Draftley barn without any kind of warning. Sometimes we would hear him walk on the roof, up the walls, on the ceiling. I can still hear his breathing if I close my eyes. That sick pig's wheezing, agonized breath that sucked air in and out in a gut-throat exhaust. The breathing and the footsteps would circle and circle until he heard someone cry. That's when the Taken would give one last cry before they were gone, along with the headmaster. The missing child would return to their beds in the morning, bearing new marks. A glancing finger left a nasty red and purple smear on one side. Sometimes the black fingertips dotted their bodies. We would never say anything about these marks to anyone. We were always afraid the headmaster would hear and give us matching marks to boots. Sometimes he would touch you with his entire palm, leaving a wrinkled imprint as raw and painful as a hot iron brand. I had a few marks as well, but I consider myself lucky that I only had a few marks, as far as I could tell. I was one of the 4 boys and 5 girls who cleaned the headmaster's home, the farmhouse. I cleaned the bathrooms and emptied out the shit cisterns by slop bucket and rope. I cleaned the bathrooms, and eventually I found a few loose ceiling boards above the toilet when I was scrubbing for mildew, standing on the windowsill. They were right above his toilet. I began thinking. This was my life for what felt like many years. I swore I could have named 25 separate times the frost came, but we had no way to keep track of time, not even by our ages. I swore sometimes we would see a kid go from looking 13, 14, back down to looking half of that. Time made no sense at the farm, and I knew that I wasn't going to get out by waiting. When I had woke one morning to find the searing red-hot handprint of the headmaster Radon Xenon on my upper arm, a hazy, starvation-induced plan emerged from the fog of my brain. I went to the special place by the cisterns where I had kept every black widow spider I had come across. I kept them behind the false brick on the side of the farmhouse, where I once collected 8 of them and discovered that black widows were cannibalistic when grouped together. Only the strongest survived. I kept hosting tournaments until 108 black widow spiders were reduced to 26 of the most toxic, twitchy, and bite-crazy widows you never want to meet. I was bitten only twice and came very close to an agonizing death both times. I knew one bite wouldn't do a monster like Xenon, and I was set. I was ready to enact the last stage of my plan when everything changed on a cold day in the early frost, when a helicopter as black as the Thunderbird made a couple of low circles over the farm. Radon Xenon went insane. He poisoned half the meals the day after the helicopter came, and after breakfast he took us all outside to form a queue outside the chicken slaughterhouse. When he began leading us in one by one, a few joined me and ran. Judging from the screams, he caught most of the runners, but he didn't catch me. I spent many nights fantasizing about this moment. when I wasn't listening to his footsteps or sick breathing. I put the Black Widows inside an old compartmentalized chocolate box scavenged out of the wood pile, perfect for keeping each one locked away. I went up through the floorboards and hid in the space in the bathroom. The headmaster may not sleep through this paranoia, but everyone's gotta go eventually, even monsters. Those cisterns didn't shit themselves. It was dark by the time that he arrived with his candle. The sound of him pulling down his trousers and his simultaneous grunt masked the sound of me moving the planks above him aside, pulling the lid off the box of 26 Nightmare, showering the headmaster with ravenous, crazed gladiators. My beauties began biting the headmaster as soon as they landed. The terror of the child farm, the demon named Ranon Xenon lied curled around his toilet, eyes swelling shut, a mouth locked in a disgusted, surprised, outrageous gurgle of horror as spasms racked his whole body. Before his eyes swelled completely shut, he saw my small 7-year-old face peering down the hole in this darkness. The missing child. The headmaster began to cackle. I knew this could happen. There is no free will. It's fine. I lived 10,000 years already. I lived your happy summers, wonderful marriages, fruitful successes. Your life was beautiful beyond compare. That's why He smashed a few spiders scudding around his face, but I could tell he was fading fast. You and I are ghosts now, were his last intelligible words before the headmaster's breathing stopped. I hid for 4 more hours before carefully making my way to the window, the safest place in the room. The spiders were done and gone. The chopper returned with the convoy of armed men right before sunrise. I was the only survivor of the farm. The captain of the operation was a man named Clinton Moxley, chief field investigator for the Security Bureau of Reclamation. He adopted me and I took his last name. He was the one who named me Howard. He even said I knew him from before. He also said he was able to find me due to tracers injected into me before I went. I never knew I had them. I told my father what little I knew. He corrected me on a few things. He chooses victims who had good lives, my father would explain as he would tuck me in. His existence is the greatest evidence that time is a physical dimension, something that exists and can be crafted and stolen. He lives your years in just a few seconds. We believed he is responsible for over 100,000 homeless children across the world, another young human with a frail, old, used-up timeline. I asked the only father I knew why he adopted me. He brought me to the master bedroom dual mirror and told me to take off my shirt. Because I owe you. You were an old man once, Howard. You were my partner within the bureau. You went sent into the farm by yourself to try to shut it down. I will make sure you will get the help you need to remember. I had hoped that you would remember something about your past on your own, but I see the headmaster got to you too. I looked behind me using a set of mirrors to see my own back for the first time, and seeing it covered in handprints. That was many years ago. True to Headmaster's words, I have been a ghost among the living since then. It's been hard even sleeping, especially now. For the past few nights, I have heard both the Headmaster's footsteps and rasping breath next to my bed. My father never said they've found the Headmaster's body. I know he wants me and his farm back. He wants me back. He wants all of his children back. Vincent turned off the lights in his hardware store. He zipped up his black fleece jacket and walked out into the cold, lonely night. He fumbled for the keys in the pocket of his jeans, shivering slightly. He finally fished a rusted copper key and locked the front entrance door. He sighed and started to walk home. As he was walking down the sidewalk, something in the side glinted dully, catching his eye. Next to a sewage drainage was a small black ball. He curiously shuffled over to the ball, knelt down and touched the ball. There was a gust of cold wind and Vincent shivered and glanced nervously behind him. He felt like he was being watched. Quickly, he picked up the ball and examined it. It was an 8 ball. The whole ball was smooth like it had never been used before. He looked into the small triangle glass and was intrigued when he noticed that the word yes behind the glass were glowing brightly in the dark. He decided to ask the ball a simple yes or no question. Am I wearing a black jacket? Vincent shook the ball and looked into the glass. Definitely, was what came up. Vincent smiled. It was just one of those coincidences, so he decided to ask another one. Am I in a relationship with anyone? Vincent knew he wasn't in a relationship with anyone. He wasn't much of a social man. I don't know, the ball replied. Vincent asked another question on whether he supported Obama. Again, the ball answered, I don't know. Vincent asked more questions about his personal life, and no matter how hard or fast he shook the ball again and again, it came up as I don't know. Finally, Vincent sighed and decided to ask a different question. Am I a boy? Certainly. Vincent paused for a while. Weird, he thought. Am I listening to my iPod? No. Is it nighttime? Definitely. Vincent shivered. Am I holding an 8 ball? Of course. Vincent was feeling colder now, and he thought he heard a rustling sound just in front of him. He couldn't see anything much in the darkness except for a house, surrounded by small bushes and trees. He flipped out his cell phone and turned it on lantern mode, but still there was nothing he could see. He instinctively looked back to where his door was and tried to see anything strange. Nothing. Shakily, he started to walk back to his house. Vincent asked one more question. Am I walking to my house? Yes. Vincent started to walk faster. As he was walking to his house, he would occasionally glance behind him, feeling like someone was watching him, trying to catch up to him. When he reached his front door, he impatiently jabbed his key into the keyhole, missing a few times, before putting it perfectly into the hole. When he unlocked the door, he swung it open quickly and shut it behind him. Locking the door, Vincent ran into the kitchen and grabbed a kitchen knife. He felt stupid, but he pushed out this thought. Slowly, he slid the knife into its case and then put the knife securely in his pocket. He swore he heard scraping and bumping out in his front door, but he resisted the temptation to go check. Instead, he walked into his bathroom, turned on the lights, and closed the door, locking it. He decided to ask a question. Am I at home right now? Yes. Vincent tapped his thumbs tensely. Am I eating anything? I don't know. Am I in the living room? I don't know. Then suddenly he heard the front door burst open and footsteps coming through the entrance. Vincent held his breath, his face going pale. He slammed off the lights in the bathroom and hid himself behind the sink waiting, clutching his kitchen knife. He heard the footsteps passing his bathroom. The footsteps entered into the living room, and then they stopped. He felt the ball in his hand move slightly. Vincent took a look at the ball and his heart almost skipped a beat. Definitely not. He heard footsteps again, walking up the stairs. Vincent made his escape. He ran out of the bathroom and out the front door. He ran out onto the streets and back to where the stores were. Are you still trying to find me? Of course. When he reached his door, he looked around him. Across from his hardware store was an old magic shop. The door was slightly ajar. "Are you still at my house?" Vincent asked. "Haha, no." "Are you coming to get me?" "Yes." "Do you know where I am?" "Most likely." "Should I be afraid?" "Of course." He pushed his way into the store and flipped on the light switch. Lights failed to turn on, so Vincent flashed out his cell phone and turned on lantern mode. Breathing heavily, he scanned the large store looking in shock. The whole store was trashed. Vincent then jumped back in horror as he saw the dead body of the manager. He walked over to the body and saw a piece of paper in one hand and a transparent blade of a knife in the other. Vincent hastily snatched the blade and rubbed with his pointer finger along the flat side of the blade. For a second, all fear vanished inside of him. The blade glowed suddenly with a low hum. A beautiful white light shined into Vincent's eyes, making him close them tightly. When his eyes readjusted, he marveled at the beauty of the light. It was a light of hope, the absence of darkness. Just then, Vincent was startled by the noise of footsteps entering the store. There was a low, terrifying grunt. Fear took over Vincent again, causing the blade to lose its light. He flipped it off and slowly backed into the very back of the store. "Are you going to try to kill me now?" Vincent whispered. "Very good chance." He pocketed the 8-ball in his jacket. His left hand slowly slid out the kitchen knife in its case while clutching the transparent blade with his right. He slowly paced around randomly along the shelves and messes. He didn't know whether to sneak out or try stabbing the creature from behind. The footsteps and the grunts were coming closer and closer. Vincent prepared himself. He waited patiently behind an old shelf of cards. Cautiously, Vincent leaned his head out of the left, catching a glimpse of the creature from the side. It looked like a huge rag doll. Its mouth was wide open, its jaw hanging low. That's all that Vincent could make out in the dark. Quickly, Vincent pulled his head back behind the shelf. His breathing grew more rapid. He was on a breaking point. 3, 2, 1. Vincent jumped out behind the creature, lunging the knife into the creature's head. The beast stumbled backwards, howling. It slammed against the wall. Regaining its balance, Vincent watched frozen in dread as the creature sluggishly pulled the knife out of its head. The creature started to laugh madly. It tossed the knife at Vincent, who ducked to the right just in the nick of time. The knife wound on the creature slowly stitched back up, and the creature pounced onto Vincent while he screamed. Vincent was knocked back, bumping into a shelf. The shelf rocked a little, causing a bucket to drop onto the creature's head. The creature's grasp loosened, and Vincent broke free. He grabbed the shelf and pushed it over onto the creature. It moved furiously as it deliberately tried to free itself from the shelf. Vincent felt a twinge of bravery, and suddenly, the blade shined a gorgeous beam of white light. Taking out the 8-ball, Vincent said triumphantly, "Do you think you're still going to kill me?" "I don't know." Vincent held the blade high in the air, throwing light on the ceiling, and slammed it down on the creature's neck just as it struggled to get out. The blade of the knife sunk into the creature's neck, filling his whole body with light. The creature shrieked and bellowed as he flopped over, around like a fish on land, before disappearing completely. It was over. Vincent sighed and nervously chuckled. Then he remembered that there was a piece of paper on the dead manager. He made his way towards his body, feeling sorry for the man, before curiously picking up the paper. Anxiously, he read it aloud. "I didn't know it would turn out like this. What have I done? It's going to eat my soul, and it's going to eat yours. Please do something." Vincent's head was filled with questions, but he decided that ignorance is bliss. He slowly put the paper into his pocket. Vincent quickly took out the 8-ball. Standing completely still, Vincent asked it a final question. Am I doing jumping jacks while saying All You Need Is Love by the Beatles? Vincent shook the ball nervously and it answered the question in 2 words. Of course. We see the same faces passing by every day, my faithful wife and I. Ghosts walking by our windows, their faces gaunt and pale, their speech slurred, almost hauntingly so. They held up signs, although most of which read similar messages. We work for food, feed me, spare change? You had to feel sorry for the beggars and homeless on the streets when you run a respected neighborhood diner. Their faces unwashed, we thought that we could not just feed them for free. Then regular patrons would always demand the same treatment, that it would be unfair and unjust. Yet, at the same time, we couldn't just leave them out there to just rot either. We have to help them. We looked at the picture of our son, who went and never returned from war, and that was how our idea struck. The next day, when the night was going by lazily, we let this one man in. He introduced himself as Kyle. Kyle was one of those people. He had been sleeping in the alleyways and the outskirts of the town for years after he was laid off and lost his home. Unable to make a living for himself with how bad the economy was doing, he ordered a brisket, a diner specialty. In the kitchen, as she was preparing the man's food, my wife asked me if what we were doing was right, if our method, if this was a way to truly guide them. After a long discussion, I assured her that our friend Kyle would be thankful for us helping him along his way. Kyle's eyes lit up as we brought the plate out, and he began to chow down quickly. He was a hungry one. We wondered when was the last time he ever had a good meal exactly. His mouth was almost mechanical in how quickly it took in and chewed and swallowed each bite down. With a small smile, he thanked us for the wonderful meal. We just smiled on out of courtesy more than anything else. He blacked out and was later pronounced dead by the police. We covered it up well. After all, it turned out that the homeless man had a fatal disease and could have died any day. A bit of luck on our side there. The second, the third, the fourth. All these wretched souls that were set free of the suffering from homelessness, disease, and starvation. Our efforts were put at rest after one certain customer came in. It still haunts us to this day. Not a moment goes by where we think about what we had done that evening. He told us that his name was Jason as I held the door open for him. He was a very scruffy man in ragged and dirty clothing. It was an eyesore just staring at the poor son of a bitch for too long. He needed help, and we were the ones to set him on the path to a better place. A special and celestial kind of home up high. God was calling him to take him home with wide open arms. I felt it in my bones, in my blood. We gave him a big meal of steak to eat, and like the rest of them, he did not seem to notice that it had been spiked with poison. Oh, how he loved it. He told us how it reminded him of his mother's cooking when he was a child. We smiled in unison and waited for his freedom. And soon it came as always as we watched his eyes close for the very last time. The investigator, per usual, came as soon as possible. Surprisingly still, they had not suspected a single thing despite the bodies piling up, at least until we turned ourselves in. The man was apparently an amnesiac after the tragedy a few years back. The doctor looking him over noticed that the slum was wearing a dog tag around his throat. And my heart sank as he read the name. I was confused at first, but then it struck home. It turned out that our poor dear son never did die in the war after all. Two men, both seriously ill, occupied the same hospital room. One man was allowed to sit up into his bed for an hour a day to drain the fluids from his lungs. His bed was next to the room's only window. The other man had to spend all his time flat on his back. The men talked for hours on end. They spoke of their wives and families, their homes, their jobs, their involvement of the military services, where they had been on vacation, and everything else. And every afternoon, when the man in the bed next to the window can sit up, he would pass the time by describing to his roommate all the things he could see outside the window. The man in the other bed would live for those 1 hour periods, where his world would be broadened and enlivened by all the activity and color of the outside world. The window overlooked a park with a lovely lake, the man has said. Ducks and swans played on the water while children sailed their model boats. Lovers waltzed arm in arm amidst flowers of every color, and a fine view of the city skyline could be seen in the distance. As the man by the window described all this in exquisite details, the man on the other side of the room would close his eyes and imagine the beautiful scene. One warm afternoon, the man by the window described a parade passing by. Although the man could not hear the band, he could see it in his mind's eye as the gentleman by the window portrayed it with descriptive words. Unexpectedly, an alien thought entered his head. Why should he have all the pleasure of seeing everything, while I never get to see anything? It didn't seem fair. As the thought fermented, the man felt ashamed first, but as the day passed and he missed seeing more sights, his envy eroded into resentment and soon turned to sour. He began to brood and found himself unable to sleep. He should be by that window, and that thought now controlled his life. Late one night, as he lay staring at the ceiling, the man by the window began to cough. He was choking by the fluid in his lungs. The other man watched in the dimly lit room as the struggled man by the window groped for the button to call for help. Listening from across the room, he never moved. He never pushed his own button, which would have brought the nurse running in less than 5 minutes. The coughing and choking stopped, along with the sound of breathing. Now, there's only silence, deathly silence. The following morning, the day nurse arrived to bring water for their baths. When she found the lifeless body of the man by the window, she was saddened and called the hospital attendant to take him away. No words and no fuss, since nurses are quite used to these matters, and as soon as it seems appropriate, the man asked if he could be moved to next to the window. The nurse was happy to make the switch, and after making sure he was comfortable, she left him alone. Slowly, painfully, he propped himself up on one elbow to take his first look. Finally, he would have the joy of seeing it all himself. He strained to slowly turn to look out the window beside the bed. It faced a blinked wall. The man asked the nurse what could have compelled his deceased roommate, who would describe such wonderful things outside this window. The nurse responded that the man was blind and could not even see the wall. She said, "Perhaps he just wanted to encourage you in his own way." I have obsessive-compulsive disorder. I'm not a germaphobe or a checker, I just really hate odd numbers. It's hard to explain, but I just don't feel right, and I have to rectify it. I see one shoe on the floor, I have to find the other before anxiety becomes unbearable. I buy food in pairs, I have 2 cars, even though I only use one. I was so delighted when my kids were born and I had twins, identical ones at that. They were the light of my life, and for the longest time I got my OCD under control. It's amazing how the love of someone you created can change the way you think about things. How silly I was to think something as arbitrary as odd numbers could rule my life. Thank God for the miracle of life. But when my daughter Sally became sick with pneumonia, it sent me into depression. I watched as my sweet little child wither away. I sat on the chair next to her bed when the nurse came along and pulled a sheet over her face. Looking at the linen pulled taut over my daughter's face, my legs started jittering. A cold sweat gathered on my brow. I hate odd numbers. What do I do with the other one? Hello, I'm a killer and I have no problem admitting that. Many people have fallen victim to my gruesome attacks and I live life regretting none of it. I'm only sharing my story here so that someone out there can know about it. Whether or not you choose to believe it is up to you, of course. I was a normal child, but normal is so relative, so who am I to make that call? What I should say is that I grew up how you would expect a kid to grow up. My parents treated me properly. I did great in school, and I also had many friends. It wasn't until high school that I started feeling the need to kill. It was all so spontaneous. I was just sitting in class one day staring at one of the students, when the image of him dying popped into my head. I zoned out and focused on the image. His body lying in a pool of blood leaking from his head. His arms were snapped behind his back and his feet were missing the big toes. A few weeks later, that daydream became a reality, and I got away with it. Everyone in school was whispering rumors to one another as I walked to class. Some were saying that he joined the army. Others were convinced that he just moved, just like many other kids did before him. I was the only one who knew the truth, and I had to hide my devilish grin from the rest of the school. That was my only murder in high school, but it ignited the flame. When I reached adulthood, I landed a successful job and had plenty of money to obtain the tools I had always dreamed of using on my victims. That's when I began to develop a signature style. I would always sever the big toes, but I'd no longer snap the arms behind the back. Honestly, the sound of bones breaking didn't sit well with me. Every day I would watch the news expecting to see the one of the victims that had been found, but they never were. Years went by and I targeted another 12 victims. They were no one in particular. Women, teenagers, it really didn't matter to me. A dead body is a dead body in my eyes. I don't care who it belongs to. Very few of them would put up a fight, and that was fine with me. I wasn't trying to drag out the last moments of their lives. I just wanted them to die. I wanted to savor the warmth of their blood on my hands as I slit their throat. About a week after I killed my final victim, I met a girl that I ended up falling in love with. She doesn't realize how close she was to becoming just another undiscovered body. She wasn't able to have kids, which was fine with me. I never really saw myself as a father. Neither of us believe in God, so we saw no point in getting married. I was okay with this as well. I felt like my life was finally going to be normal again. After we had been together for a few years, I decided to tell her about my past. I made a special dinner for her to lighten the mood. However, when I told her, she just laughed and thought I was being ridiculous. It turned into her treating it like some type of role-playing fantasy I had, and she ignored me as I told her it was the truth. I didn't know how to prove it to her, so I killed someone in front of her. One night, I brought her with me on what she thought was a date. When we got to the spot, I opened the trunk so she could see my victim. She still thought it was a joke and asked how I got my friend to agree to this. I think she finally understood that it was no joke as I sliced the man's throat. Her face turned pale and she reached into her purse to get her phone. I was prepared for this though, and I knocked her unconscious. After I finished with my signature killing pattern, I drove back to the house. My secret was not safe with her, but I loved her too much to kill her. Right now, she's kept in my basement. I don't treat her like a prisoner, mind you. She has everything she could ever want. I'm hoping in time I can start leaving her untied at night so she'll quit trying to escape. I know one day she'll accept who I am. Maybe one day she'll help me fulfill my new fantasy of killing together. Or perhaps you guys won't believe me either, and you'll brush this off as just another made-up story. But that's the funny thing about being a killer. My aunt was a con artist, and she learned from the best. Her father, Grandpa, never made it big, but he lived for the game. Staying under the radar was probably what made sure he never got caught. Not once. He was so proud of that. Mom didn't take up the family business. She got religious instead and married a tax accountant. It's so ironic that it sounds like a joke, but it's true. Dad was the best for helping out with math homework. Mom's more colorful relations were kept at a figurative arm's length throughout my childhood, lest they corrupt me into following a more interesting life path. Aunt Cassie was the only one who could wiggle her way into my life. She was fully licensed as a psychologist, which made her a smidge more respectable. But Aunt Cassie used her ability to read a person in a whole different way. One probably not intended by the university who issued her degree. Aunt Cassie was a bona fide psychic. She had a shop and everything. Crystals, herbs, candles. Anything you needed to fill the mystic void in your life could be bought for a healthy markup at her little store. There was even a private room in the back that was used for readings and seances. Because both of my folks worked, I would often get dropped off at the shop where I would help Aunt Cassie out with those little shows. Anything from messing with the lights to knocking on walls. Playing with the thermostat was my idea, and it was an effective one. Customers came to get chills down their spine, didn't they? Why not provide? Cassie helped me become the skeptic I am today. Showed me all the behind-the-scenes sleight-of-hand stuff. We'd watch daytime talk shows with magicians and mediums, and Cassie would explain every step from a basic rundown of cold readings to how to spot an audience plant. After one particularly convincing episode, I asked a natural question. Couldn't some of it be real? My aunt's reply was firm. The dead don't talk, kiddo. Anyone who claims otherwise is blowing smoke out of their ass. It was her conviction more than anything that made me believe her. There was only one client I ever saw my aunt refuse. He was old, bald, and stooped. Took his hat off when he came inside and twisted it in his hands as he talked. Cassie tensed up immediately when she saw him. The man claimed to have worked in the prison systems. Death row. He's been responsible for carrying out the final punishments of the worst convict criminals on the planet. In his old age, this tormented him, ate at his soul. He wanted Cassie to contact the souls of the ones he killed, so he could apologize and beg for forgiveness before he joined them. My aunt threw the most epic fit. I'd never seen her so mad. She hollered and threw things, shouting for him to shut up and get out. I hid under the counter with my hands over my ears until he left. Later, I thought her reaction was one of fear because of the man's job. An executioner has to be a con artist's worst fear. Eventually, I got found out. I wanted to put on a magic show for my folks, and stupidly, I thought I'd do the medium bit where I pretended to talk to Grandpa for Mom, since she missed him so much. Huge mistake. Mom freaked the hell out and banned me from seeing her sister ever again. I left some textbooks at the shop though, so I got to run in and grab them while Mom fumed in the car outside. Aunt Cassie didn't even have to ask what was wrong. She could read my face after all. I gave her a hug and a teary snot-filled goodbye. She did tell me one last secret though. Kiddo, there's a curse in this family that gets passed like a torch. I hope to whatever gods might be out there that I don't pass it on to you when I go. We didn't get to talk again for more than 9 years. That's when Facebook entered the popular public sphere and no parental ban could keep me from trying to reconnect. It was awkward. She had a tough go of life, diagnosed with a schizoid disorder that took her business from her. To pay bills, she went legitimate, and with her business went all her zest and playful passion for life. One day, I got home to a message waiting in my inbox that made my stomach drop to the floor. I love you, kiddo. Remember what I told you. I dialed her number, already crying. No answer. Didn't stop me from dialing again and again and again. I was too much of a mess to tell my mom. The police did that for me though, next day. Car accident. Drunk driver. The funeral was a blur. Relatives I'd never seen in the flesh packed the church. I sat between my parents in the front row and racked my brain trying to figure out what it was my aunt wanted me to remember. We followed the hearse to the cemetery in dead silence. The priest did the last little speeches and then I was left alone by her headstone, still straining to remember. Snatches of my parents' conversation floated in and out of my attention span. If only Cassie hadn't been so cryptic. Didn't expect such a small turnout. It's a shame. Small turnout? That bothered me. The service had practically been stuffed to the rafters. I turned around to say something and finally understood. Behind my parents, there was a whole host of people, all standing and staring dead ahead. My parents weren't paying them the slightest attention. The priest muttered some soothing condolences and excused himself, walking right through the thick of the crowd without disturbing a single soul. At the head of the group, looking just like the day I seen her last, was Cassie. All the rest in peace sentiment in the world wouldn't have done her any good. Her mouth was wide open, and just like that I knew. I know what the family curse is. I know why the dead don't talk. They're too busy screaming. My work friends and I were out at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but you know, cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around. Maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kinda keeping to themselves. Sort of people you would expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I'm sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse, the bartender, is kinda lazily flipping through the channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen, which I registered as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar though. "Hey Jess, can you switch that back?" I called out to her. The news comes back on and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building and it's burning. Holy shit, I say, loudly enough that a few people follow my gaze to the television. That's my apartment. The crowd in the bar falls kinda quiet, everybody staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor. Property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. "Jesus, man," one of my coworkers said. That sucks." There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in the situation either. "Yep," I agree, just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to a reporter on the scene. He's standing a little further away. Looking at the shops in the background, I can tell he's across the street on the northwest corner of the building. "Firefighters are expected on the scene any moment," he's saying. "And hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any further. As I was saying before, it's very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad. Or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded." "Wow, he's really laying it on thick," my other coworkers jokes. I chuckled a bit. All things considered, at the moment, it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on," the reporter on the TV says. "We're getting some updated information. It seems... Hang on a moment while we readjust the camera." The previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on an area of the building about halfway up the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over. That's my place. I swore I turned that light out. I think at first. Then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera is zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch petrified as the camera zooms in closer. The reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated soul still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot. And everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air, back and forth, back and forth. And then he is waving them up and down at his sides. Then he's banging both fists on the glass. Then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is to the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance. But everything is to the exact same rhythm, over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What in the world? I say, my voice in a hoarse whisper. And then the camera gets a little closer, and finally we can make out the person's features. It looks almost exactly like me. It's wearing the exact same clothes that I'm wearing now. Clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It also has this almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared, but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were different, but instead it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar is talking now. Everyone is fixed on the TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on the glass or jumping in circles. I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading to my floor. Oh God, I think, without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stare transfixed at the screen. From this angle, you can just barely see the top of my front door through the window. Not too far behind where this creature is flailing around. Right now, it is holding its face in its hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly, the door behind it bursts open as presumably the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous pointed teeth. Then the lights go out. We all just sat there, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything as we all quietly pay our bills to leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire at my apartment and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on the subreddit know what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let the whole fucking place burn to the ground.
When Daniel opened his front door that morning, he immediately regretted it. Standing in his porch was his drug dealer, towering over him at 7 feet with shoulders as wide as cliffs, his furious great eyes beaming down into his. Daniel, remembering the 5 figures he owed him, could only watch as his scarred knuckles homed in right between his eyes. Daniel regained consciousness still in the dark, only feeling the stinging of the mighty blow now. His woozy head still believed that he was in a dream, and his stomach felt frail and sick. When he realized he was fully awake, he snapped out of his trance, feeling himself lying down and crammed into a box. Oh, Jesus, no. I've been buried alive. He panicked and began to flailing around, feeling the strong, thick wood that trapped him. He did this for a few seconds until he felt something slide off the top of his belly and heard it fall on the wood close beside him. He felt around and gripped a rubbery thin cylinder that was wide at the top. He picked it up. It's a torch. He rubbed his thumb up and down, feeling for the switch, clicking it on when he found it. He shone the torch around on the brown slits of wood, confirming that he had been boxed in somewhere alone. He shone it at the top and saw a 3-line message written in black marker directly above him. It says, "You got lucky. Next time there's no escape. Punch here for freedom." Below that, there were 3 arrows in additional black marker pointing to a circle that were lighter shade of brown to the rest of the wood. Must be the world's softest dealers, Daniel thought to himself, counting his luck. Daniel clutched his hand into a fist, driving it into the circle as fast as he could. It didn't break, but he could easily tell that it was by far the weakest point. He tried this again, but was still unsuccessful. One more should do it. Daniel's hand penetrated the top as water gushed down around his arm like a tap that was suddenly turned on too hard. Daniel choked on the salty seawater that was forced its way into his mouth and down his throat as it engulfed his face and body and chilled him to the bone. Daniel desperately punched the top of the box with both hands slowly, the resisting water absorbing his force. Before he knew it, the box was completely full. He banged with his fists and kicked with his legs until his muscles weakened and gave in, and slowly his vision faded to black. I live in the UK. A colleague at work heard this from his girlfriend. A couple weeks ago, she told me about what happened on her way home on the subway at night. When she got on, there were 5 rows of empty seats, but the last row had 3 people sitting in it. As she was a little shy, she went and sat opposite of them. She settled down and looked up to see the woman sitting opposite of her, staring right at her. So she got out of her book and started to read. But every time she looked up, the woman was still staring. The train pulled into the next station and a man got on. He looked up and down the carriage, took a look at her and the people in the opposite seats, and came and sat next to her. As the train left the station, the man leaned back and said quietly in her ear, "If you know what's good for you, you'll get off at the next station with me." She was scared, but thought the best idea would be to get off at the next station as he asked, as there might be people around to help her. The next stop comes up, and she leaves the train with this man. The man finally said, "Thank God, I didn't mean to scare you, but I had to get you off that train. I'm a doctor, and the woman sitting opposite to you was dead. The 2 men on either side were propping her up." According to the guy who told the story, the girl and the doctor called the police, who stopped the train at the next station.
Sirens blare through the still night sky in a haze of flashing red lights. I slowly opened my eyes, thoroughly confused about what was going on. I was in my car. The windscreen in front of me shattered to bits, my head throbbing something awful. I looked beside me and there she was, knocked unconscious, or worse, dead. It all came back to me in a flash. The missteer, the car smashing into the side of the building. I tried to remember what I tried to avoid which caused the fateful swerve, but my mind drew a blank. Ambulances had already arrived at the scene. There were a couple of paramedics prying the passenger door, pulling her out and placing her onto her gurney. I stumbled out of the car myself, relatively uninjured by the crash, it seemed. Besides the headache, I didn't seem to have any other major injuries. She was rushed to a nearby ambulance in the haze of frantic EMT jargon. I tried to overhear what her situation was, but couldn't make out any words clearly. I realized my ears were ringing, probably part of the headache. In a confused daze, I automatically climbed into the back of the ambulance with her. Fighting every throbbing cell in my brain, I attempted to shout a few words of encouragement to her unconscious body. The paramedics assumed that we're together, having been in the same vehicle, and didn't seem to object to me tagging along. In fact, they barely seemed to care I was in for the ride. Reaching the hospital set off another set of frenzied actions. Hospital staff appeared from nowhere at the ambulance door and whiskered away through the swinging metal doors before I had a chance to stumble out and onto the sidewalk. Catching up, I saw her being wheeled into a room to the left of the waiting area and rushed in after the group of nurses surrounding her stretcher. Another vague exchange of medical jargon between the ER doctor and his nurses, and from nowhere an ominous-looking device I understood to be a defibrillator emerged. The doctor moved swiftly, and before they had a chance to clear the room of people, vaselined the cold metal plates and zapped her. Nothing. He repeated the action 3 more times before she sputtered suddenly to life. At that moment, all the stress in the world seemed to be lifted off my little shoulders. She was alive. All this time, I was more or less sure she would have been, but there was always that little voice talking to me in the back of my head, saying she's gone. She opened her eyes slowly, amidst hacking and coughing, and eventually they met my relief-drenched gaze. In that moment, my feeling of euphoria vanished. Something about the way she looked at me broke my heart. Why? I didn't know. A single tear escaped her eye and rolled down her cheek. And that's when the doctor turned and walked right through me.